Welcome everyone to the Collector's Cut. I am Peter, and joining me, as always, is David.
Timing.
That would be a funny bit if it wasn't that sometimes when you do calls over the internet, sometimes you just get delays. So I just thought there was something wrong there for about 3 seconds. So lovely.
I tried to do a little head motion just to show that I was building up to it.
Okay.
Yeah, no.
All right. Okay. Well. Very good. Actually, now I'm thinking maybe I shouldn't have started with the normal intro. Maybe I should have started before we even get like the ratings logo, right? Have Tom Cruise appear on screen and thank them for coming to the theater.
I'm curious if that clip is anywhere online. If that's like allowed to go up completely separate and not get hit with copyright stuff.
Oh, I don't know. It was funny because it came up, like I say, before in our case, the BBFC screen, which is weird because you would think that if it's technically a part of the movie file, it would have to come up after, like that sort of bit. But no, it was there first. So I don't know. I felt almost awkward in the audience just watching Tom just look directly at us and being like, "This is the biggest mission yet, and we want to thank you for coming to the theater the way it was meant to be seen." All right, Tom.
Yeah, I was fully expecting it to be one of those like, "and now please silence your cell phones." But then he just said like, "Hey, thanks for showing up. Glad you're here." And then he went away. I'm like, oh, that was just genuine and heartfelt, not like trying to say anything else. I feel awkward now.
This is just Tom Cruise being enthusiastic about his franchise, his one cash cow that he has right now. I say that.
I vaguely remember there being.
I was gonna say, I say that, but he may very well do more Top Gun, which I suppose would also be a cash cow. But
oh yeah, well that's what I was gonna get to. I vaguely remember there being a similar one for Top Gun, of basically him telling the audience at home. It wasn't even the movie ones; it was at home, saying, "Here's how you should adjust your TVs so that like it doesn't have this weird motion blur on it."
You know, I will applaud that. Preach to the idiots who have all the motion smoothing turned on and all that crap. Yeah, by all means, teach them. Put filmmaker mode on. So yes, welcome everyone. Collector's Cuts Movie Podcast. We have been working through the Mission Impossible franchise over the past 8 weeks, obviously building up to this final question mark movie. You know, that's something we could talk about where they could go next once we get to the end of all of this, but. This is Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning, or Mission Impossible A: Dead Reckoning Part 2: The Final Reckoning.
I am convinced that Tom Cruise just has something against people who buy early copies of like DVDs. I think it's solely something against them.
So we will start spoiler-free, of course, as we always do. We'll give you a warning before the spoilers, but we go into them. If you're enjoying the show on YouTube, please do hit the like button and all that stuff. Helps us out a bunch if you do. And you can also support the show and help keep it all coming over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and get some bonuses. But I'll tell you more about that at the end of the episode. So, yeah, we were fairly positive on the last one. It's a bit more divisive online, but we kind of came out of it enjoying the hijinks of it and liking the set pieces and all the rest of it. And for a movie of its runtime, and this movie actually tops it by about 10 minutes. So this was, once you're at 2 hours 50, you're basically 3 hours. Like, you're not really, but it feels like you're basically 3 hours.
Yeah, I mean, I think the best way to always consider these types of movies is how many times can a theater run it per day? How many times can they rotate around? And the difference between 245 to 250 is nothing.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, once you're at 2.5, there's not much of a difference between that and 3 in terms of rotation.
Right.
Especially in the day when you've got it playing in like 8 screens, so you just got a ton of show times anyway. So who cares?
I mean, I don't know about you, but the one that had all the screen time for me this weekend, being Memorial Day weekend, is Lilo and Stitch, the Disney live-action remake of the week.
That was a lot of them, don't get me wrong, but I still had like a showing of Mission Impossible every hour, so it's not like that was slacking.
Okay. I mean, mine was limited down to 2 theaters, so it wasn't nearly that much. Or 2 screens, I mean.
Yeah, there was a lot of kids around, though, and they were all the parents were paying through the nose for the cups with the little toys at the top, milking those cash cows for everything they're worth. But, yeah, where's my Mission Impossible cup with, like, I don't know, a knife at the top or something?
Tom Cruise's slightly shaggier hair. It's actual fur on there.
Oh dear. And you can have sex with it, just like the Dune popcorn bucket, if you would like
Absolutely.
So yeah, I mean, as far as premise goes, obviously the last film introduced the idea of the entity, this AI that was kind of the main villain, and we were even questioning because they'd kind of rejiggered some things around at the between that one coming out and this one, that maybe they would have pivoted a little bit, that they would still address that, but would they still make that the focus of the movie? And it is the focus of the movie. Like, the entire movie revolves around stopping it and all that stuff. So they didn't pivot that much. So, we'll get into everything obviously properly in spoilers. I think you'll be very careful here because it is a brand new movie, plus it being a part 2 and also being kind of this capper to the whole franchise. It feels like there's a lot of things that you could spoil. So we'll keep all that as tight-lipped as we can until we give the warning. But we'll get our general impressions and stuff out of the way. So, David, what did you think of Mission Impossible, The Final Reckoning? Or maybe a better question is this the entity's world, and are you living in it?
I'm absolutely living in the entity's world, 100%. I like this one. I do like this one. I think it is somewhere in the same footing as 7 for me. Maybe not in terms of there's divisiveness. I don't think it follows the same beats or anything from 7. I think it's its own thing. But in terms of enjoyment, I'm somewhere in that same sort of area with it. There's a bunch of great stunts. That is to be expected, but I think they did a good job here of really selling it, making it feel like a big deal. I think that the general plot is a bit lightweight. I think that it's kind of to be expected here, but I was kind of hoping for a little bit more to wrap up everything, that it gets a little bit heavier on the plot elements, but it just sticks to kind of what it has been doing in Mission Impossible for a while and keeps it more so a vehicle for the big things to happen and less focusing on the plot itself. Couple of surprised faces, not going to turn that down, also not going to spoil who they are, but definitely interested in that. And then the big thing for me is that a couple of the things we were talking about in the last review, specifically this one character that we were hoping they would do something big with, they did something with, but I don't think it's what I wanted. I feel like there was, you were saying before that we were wondering about whether or not something was rejiggered in the background, something was changed because they had to have this delay between the two. I feel like there are a couple sequences in this movie where it feels like they were artifacts of a previous version of the script, and it would have had a bigger punch if other scenes were present that have since been cut out. That character, I think, is the biggest letdown out of that, where it feels like there are just several deleted scenes that are missing now because of whatever they changed up. So all in all, I will say positive, but there are definitely some flaws that we will point out as we get to them.
Yeah, I obviously I shared a lot of the same sentiments with what you're talking about there with that character, and I think they do technically pay it off, but I think there was a bigger payoff that could have happened, and I don't even think it would have taken that much to make it feel like a bigger deal. So there's definitely some thoughts on that when we get to spoilers. Yeah, so I think that the main thing is that the first 40 minutes of this movie is kind of a mess, and you can tell it's been re-edited to hell to rework it. And I even read some snippets from the director about how they kind of restructured the first part of the movie a lot in post-production. So, and there's a lot to say there. It's kind of shocking how many times it will, it'll just mention, say, Gabriel, who's a villain, who was introduced in the last movie, and the amount of times it flashbacks to just a quick snippet of his face, sometimes from earlier on in this same movie, is wild from just an editing kind of it's like a bundle of wires on the floor that have all been tangled and intermixed, and you can't tell what's what. That's the way the editing in the first chunk of this movie feels, and there's going to be a lot to discuss there. Once it kind of settles into what it's going to be doing, though, well, I still think there's some critiques you could have about some of the things it focuses on, and arguably a big kind of potential plot element it just kind of ignores in favor of doing whatever else. I do think it's a lot of fun once it gets to the goods. Once it gets to the set pieces and it gets to the big things that it wants to do, those sequences are really good. There's two really big standout ones in particular. that I think really work. A lot of the supporting cast are still pretty solid, and kind of do at least, if not get individual character things, they do at least feel like they get stuff to do as a team. As you know, that it feels like they're important to what's going on, which is nice. It is a movie that references a lot of the past movies in some way or another.
Like, I don't want to spoil anything at all, but I am shocked with how this one ties together the whole franchise, except for two.
Except for two. I had that thought. I was like, oh man, they're saying so many of these past movies are important, some more important than others.
Yeah.
And like two, nothing is mentioned from it at all. There's some clips, there's like a montage at the start, which is basically just the journey up until now. And it's like clips from every movie quickly flashing at you, right? And it's like, okay, fine. So there's a couple of shots of two in there. But later on, when stuff starts coming up from other movies, two is never ever mentioned in any way, shape, or form.
I was at a certain point, I was actually thinking, like, if they cut to a certain scene or something like that, and goddamn Thandie Newton shows up, I'm going to lose my mind in this theater.
Hey, there was something that did make me lose my mind, and it was even before they got to kind of like properly saying the thing. They just brought up a thing from a past movie, and I sat up and went, are you really doing that? Are you really going there and doing that? And, you know, obviously we'll get to that in spoilers, what I'm referring to, but I was like, damn it, they wanted to do it. They wanted to somehow tie all this together. All right, fair enough.
Balls on them.
So, yeah, and there's obviously a lot more supporting cast, which we'll get into in a bit more detail, but I mostly had a good time. I do think it's messier. I do think 7 is a bit stronger overall, just because I think it's a tighter paced and structured movie that feels like it has like a confident structure to it. This one feels like it's been messed around with so much and trying to like change things and fix things, perhaps, that you can kind of feel the evidence of that and stuff that seems lost or forgotten. One of the interesting things I read from the director in one of the interviews he did was that the movie, for the first act, originally they had this idea that it would be very non-linear, and it would basically start where Tom Cruise eventually meets like the president and stuff, and it would sort of like do a lot of jumping back and stuff to fill in like what had happened, and the idea was to keep it feeling energetic but get to the big stuff much quicker. But they felt that it didn't work, and one of the reasons why they felt it didn't work is that if you hadn't seen the last movie, it didn't really explain to a new audience what the entity was, and it left a lot of newcomers confused. So they wanted to fix that. So they re-edited it to have it completely linear, and they said that didn't work. It was a complete mess because it wasn't like, you know, envisioned that way, so it wasn't structured or written to work in that sense. So they actually had to go back and do some reshoots. For example, the first scene Hayley Atwell's in this movie was shot like 2 months ago. There was another reason for that as well. They also didn't want her first scene to be what came after that, because they felt like, let's give her a scene where she's, shown to be very capable before we have her be kind of in a predicament that she would have been in otherwise.
Right.
So,
that's fair.
It sounds like they were tinkering, particularly with that first like chunk. They were tinkering a lot, and I will say that especially the first like 20 minutes, I felt like it was speeding through so much plot that it did feel quite messy, where I'm like, none of this is kind of landing because you're just going so quick. Like, I couldn't believe how quickly we went from like going to do one thing and we just cut to another scene where they're in a different country already, and like everything was just going boom, 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 boom. There was like no like pacing to it. So that first chunk, I think, really suffers.
Yeah, I think I would have been more okay with that first chunk if it were specifically dedicated to getting all of the team back together post last movie and like getting everybody back on the same page again. But like you say, they introduced so many new plot elements that it feels like it's just kind of setting up its own movie instead of just like, I understand from an executive standpoint, yes, there will be people who come into this movie without having seen the previous one. However, I don't think you should cater to those people. I think that, yes, that is going to be something that's going to work for opening release day like right now, but the moment that this thing hits any sort of rental option or streaming options or anything like that, no one's going to remember because all of them are going to have watched 7 beforehand.
Yeah, so I think there's problems there. Not to say there's nothing in that section I don't like, because there is some stuff in there that I quite like. And not even necessarily because it's good. There's definitely, like, where it just almost, like, the rest of the movie pivots into feeling more like Mission Impossible, but there's definitely a little bit near the start where I'm like, oh, this is basically just a sci-fi movie. Where this is basically just Ethan Hunt. And I actually made this joke when I did the intro for the last review. I referred to it as IMF versus Skynet, and I actually felt that was more true in this movie for some reasons we'll get into when we get into the proper plot spoilers. But
there are Terminators specifically. That's absolutely true.
No, there's no robots, but there's definitely some more parallels to be had. So
yes,
yeah, the first chunk is all over the place, but once it gets to, like, there's a section in this movie where it's like, okay, there's a simple mission. It's impossible, don't get me wrong, it still falls under Mission Impossible, but it's relatively quite simple. But because we're doing, like, the Abyss style stuff, and it's just like an extended silent sequence of Tom Cruise on a submarine underwater, it's like, and it's like, when I say on a submarine, I mean like a submarine that's submerged, that's like, you know, sunk and is filled with water. It's eerie, it's got all this atmosphere, it's like, okay, this is actually genuinely interesting, and it feels genuinely unique versus any other set piece that's been in any of the other movies. The only other underwater sequence I can think of is from 5, and it was like not good. Like, it's actually one of the things we complained about in that movie. This is like, oh, this is so interesting and like weird and different and atmospheric. And then of course there's all the big stuff in the third act and everything else that goes there. And like you say, there's some weird ballsy things to bring back from other movies, which we'll get into in spoilers as well. But
I mean, one thing I want to really stick on here, especially in the spoiler-free section, is I think the last movie spent more, if not most of its runtime, feeling like this is the journey's end. This is where we are looking back on everything we've done, and it just had this kind of feel of, we finally have reached the end of our journey here. This one, while it does do the same, I feel that it is really front-loaded. I feel like they do it, and they do it really hard, but they get it out of the way within about 15 minutes. And then from that point on, they kind of just go back to having a good time. Obviously, the ending itself taps on that a little bit, but I think that it's not as pervasive as it was in the previous film. I think that it's a lot better of just letting us have fun without having to pause every 20 minutes and go, I really enjoyed our time here, guys. It's really been tough for me to go through all. Like, no, we just have fun.
I feel like I disagree with that in a weird way. Not even in a complaining way, but like, and so like, I get what you're saying. There's less of those types of scenes, but I think actually like cutting to scenes from the previous movies the way it does, and it's not just the first 15 minutes. Like, it's doing that for like a good hour. In fact, actually, there's some that's even in the back half of the movie, but most of it's in the first hour.
Right.
I think that feels even more like, no, we're doing all these references and we're showing clips from the very first movie because we want you to feel this nostalgia of coming full circle, that we're wrapping all this up. Even though I do think that at the end of this movie, it is left in a place where if they want to do another one, they absolutely can, and they didn't actually tie a ribbon on anything. Like, it really is open for more in every sense of the word. Yeah. So, we'll see.
I mean, I agree with what you're saying there, is that the flashbacks to the previous movies do make it feel, but that's only because the series has never done that before. I think I actually would have been fine with it if this were something that, when they talk about, oh, remember when you did that stuff in Russia, when, like, in 5 or 4, whatever movie that happened in, if they're referencing back to that and they showed a flashback, I would have been fine with it here as well. It doesn't feel like it's a nostalgia thing for me. It feels more like we're just doing visual reminders. That's our thing for this movie. Like, I don't know. It didn't feel like a nostalgia bait for me.
Well, I wasn't even necessarily trying to say nostalgia bait in a negative way, because this isn't a reboot that's trying to bank on nostalgia just to make it work. But it's something you see a lot in TV shows when you get to a final season, is they'll bring something back from a season 1 to make it feel like, oh, nostalgia, but and not in a super baity way. I don't mind when a TV show does that, because it does give it that feeling of full circle. The only problem I have here is that sometimes the flashbacks to the previous movies work fine. I think the opening montage is fine. I think when they specifically bring something up and you get a quick snippet of it, I think that's fine. but there's definitely a little bit too many of them, and there's definitely points where it feels like, combined with all the little flashbacks to this very movie, where it'll like go back to like Gabriel's face, or it'll go back to like a previous scene, and it's like, okay, I get it. We saw that. I mean, I swear there's a point in this movie where it does like a quick snippet of a scene that happened like 5 minutes ago.
Oh, no, it does. I absolutely... It was Gabriel as well. Like, they 100% just show him doing the exact same thing within 2 minutes of him actually doing it.
So that feels particularly messy. But it's a very normal thing to try and harken back to the past when you're trying to do your final season. And that kind of feels true here. And in some ways, this is even a bigger deal because this is a movie franchise that is 29 years old, right? 1996 to 2025. That is a longer span of time than most TV shows or franchises will last, at least in one form. Obviously, things get rebooted and you come back for a new version of something. This isn't that. This is the one continuous continuity and star for just shy of 30 years. So I think they're allowed to do some of that. I think, and some of it does work, and it does feel like you whatever. But anyway, I think, as far as everything else goes, in terms of like cast, which we won't get into everyone here, but obviously we like Plum Klementieff in the last one a lot, and she's here again this time, and I think she's again pretty good here. Again, I would have liked a bit more, like to like flesh out what she was going through in this movie, but I think she doesn't suffer too much. I think she gets some cool moments, and it seemed like the audience were finding like her reactions to things kind of funny, and her being on the good side now is kind of cool. So. Yeah, you got that going.
Yeah, I again, it just is one of those things where I feel like there are certain sequences that would have worked better in a different script. It feels like the script was tinkered with and they kept sequences around because it was cool, but they didn't make it work with whatever changes they made. Particularly her intro, I think, was just a little bit
it's rushed.
Weak in terms of getting... Yeah, it's rushed. That's the best way of putting
rushed.
it.
I don't even know if that's a script problem, though. I think that might be more... Like, I would not be surprised if some of these extra scenes you're saying you want were filmed. And it's an editing choice to chop. Because, like I say, the first half of this movie feels so chopped up that I think a lot of this stuff might have been an editing thing after the fact rather than a script thing in the forefront. But I mean, who's to say? It doesn't really matter, I guess, in the end. But my impression would be that a lot of this was tinkering with after the fact. So we got her, obviously. Simon Pegg's back. We got Ving Rhames back. We have other characters from the last movie like Kittredge. Apparently, Vanessa Kirby did shoot scenes for this movie, but they were all cut. So,
I get it, especially if they are trying to cater to an audience that may or may not have seen the last movie, because that, how do you explain that of, here she is, but don't worry, she's dead?
What are you talking about?
Oh, am I thinking of the wrong person? Oh, that's Vanessa Kirby. Sorry, I'm thinking of, who's the one who died in the last movie?
Oh, Elsa.
Whatever her name is. Elsa, that's it. Sorry, I was thinking of the wrong actress.
I'm like, she didn't die, what are you talking about?
It would be even more complicated to reintroduce Vanessa Kirby. She is such like a weird character playing this third angle all the time.
Yeah, she had a good, like, I don't know, energy in the last movie though, so it's a little bit of a shame, but I can kind of see why she doesn't fit into like what's going on here. Right. So we have Angela Bassett returning from sick. She wasn't in the last one, although her photograph was in the last one. It turns out the photograph was there because she is now president of the US.
I thought for sure that image was like an in memoriam sort of thing, where it's like, oh, the previous chief, and she died, and then it's like, nope, she just got her promotion.
Yep. I'll be honest though, it did make me sad a couple times during this movie, just because like she's such a competent like president who's like considering like and weighing up the cost of every decision she's making, and I'm like, God, if this actually happened right now, we would be so screwed. Like all of us would be so screwed. It would
literally be like the middle of Mission Impossible 7. Like Ethan would just be in the middle of like, all right, so here's the plan, gang. What's that? The nukes have been launched? Oh, okay. Never mind.
That's exactly what it would be. And we got a bunch of new people showing up. Holt McElhaney's in here. Many people might know him from Mindhunter. He's like, I think, he's the Defense Secretary of Defense or whatever.
Yeah, so the
them.
last movie had the very brief sequence with like the heads of different intelligence departments or something like that. We just get the expansion where there's now extra, like you said, Secretary of Defense. I think there's a Secretary of War or something like that. Like we just have some extra people piping in with their voices here.
Yeah, it's him and Nick Offerman are the main two that you would notice.
And Janet McTeer.
Yes. And then we also have in kind of bit roles the Apple TV invasion, I'll call it, because we got Tremel Tillman from Severance, and we got Hannah Waddingham from Ted Lasso. That's the show I'm trying to think of. She's in here with an American accent, which was very distracting. Not because it was bad, but I'm just so used to how she normally sounds that I'm like, oh, you're really putting on an accent here. This is very different.
Fair. I don't think I've seen her in pretty much anything yet.
I mean, she's very English. Is basically just what I'll say. So,
she was also in Lilo and Stitch. She is having a good weekend.
Everything's coming up, Hannah. She was in. I think she was in Game of Thrones. I think people probably know her from that as well.
Oh, was she? Hold on.
I think so.
Game of. All right. Yeah, I don't remember her by name. Septa Unella, yeah. It's not ringing a bell.
She rings a bell. I've seen the gif of her ringing the bell. People always post it.
Oh, wait, that's actually her? Oh, okay, then yeah, I know who she is then. Fair enough.
There you go.
If she's the one who's actually ringing the bell.
Yeah. So, big cast, a lot of things going on there. Big set pieces, big stunts, music's, pretty much on par with the last one. It's done a lot of the same kind of motifs and things, using the theme in different ways.
Yeah, I more so even than the last one, I really noticed them working the theme in. Like, it's not even so much that it's like the theme itself. It's just that descending three tones. It's the dun, 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 and like stretching it, warping it, doing whatever they need. But that is a constant throughout this movie.
Yeah, you can do it big and epic sounding, you can do it dark sounding, you can do it emotional sounding, and they do all those throughout the movie, pretty much.
Yep.
And there's a good pin drop at one point where there's kind of like an epic version of the do-do-do, do-do-do. So they do play with the other parts as well, but yeah, the main three notes is what they really play with more than anything.
Yep.
I'm trying to think of what else I want to talk about before we get to spoilers, because I feel like so much of it is spoilery.
Yeah. I don't really have any. I mean, I want to talk about the stunt work because it is impressive, but like the stunt work is directly tied to spoilers, so
yes,
kind of hard not to.
I guess what I will say is that the reception to this movie has been, again, very divisive, arguably more so than the last one. I know some people think it's bad, some people think it's worse than 2 even, which I do think is a crazy statement because 2 is terrible.
That's insane. That's just the internet trying to be as absolutism as much as possible.
Yeah. I do think there's a lot of worthwhile stuff here. I also do think that the feel of it does feel a little bit different for the most part. And I would say until like the big like set piece, the big stunt set piece with Tom Cruise in the third act, I would argue that a lot of this feels visually very different, just in terms of all of its locations and stuff, to a lot of the other Mission Impossibles. So if someone had a problem with that and said, oh, it doesn't necessarily feel as Mission Impossibly as for what this franchise has been up until now, I really couldn't argue. I'd understand why you'd feel that way. I was kind of happy with it feeling a little bit different and doing some different things, but I get it. But there's definitely complaints to be had. Like I said, I'll happily critique how much of a kind of editing like mess the first chunk of this movie is, because it absolutely is. But I had a good time.
Yeah, I'd agree. No, same. I by the time I came out with it, I knew that I enjoyed the movie. I guess it really was just wrestling in my mind of where I place it amongst the hierarchy of the rest of the movies. But it's definitely, if there's 8 of them, it's in the top half. I don't think that it dips below the level where it gets into, I like, at least 4 more of them more than I enjoyed this.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe when we're doing the extra ratings for Patreon, we might do a little ranking as well, see how we feel now that we've wrapped up. But there's definitely some discussions to be had there. But I think we will give the spoiler warning, because I think it is going to be hard to talk about any more of this without diving in properly. So, spoilers for Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning. You have been warned. So the movie, other than Tom Cruise, of course, welcoming us to the theater.
Yes.
Thank you for coming. Yes, thank you, Tom. You're welcome.
Mm-hmm.
If I had balls, I might have shouted out "You're welcome" in front of the packed audience, but I kept it to myself.
I'm glad you're not that type of person, Pete. I'm happy.
I'm glad I am too, but to be fair though, it's not during the movie. So if someone did shout something stupid after he spoke to us, I wouldn't have been that mad.
But you see, that primes the audience. That primes them that says shouting out is okay.
That's true. Yeah, keep your mouth shut. Lest you be lashed with the whip that I
will
brought.
Strap you to underneath the theater screen, the blinding lights in your eyes the entire time.
So yeah, the movie actually starts with like a shot of like the entity's eye, right? You know, the digital kind of like circular pattern we've been seeing since the last movie, and it does all these flashes of the old movies, and it's almost like the entity's like analyzing Ethan Hunt. It's like, okay, who is my enemy? What has he been up to these past 30 years? And it's like quick flashes of all these different things, and you know, there is some
this is what happens when somebody asks ChatGPT, "Hey, write me a Mission Impossible movie."
But it is kind of interesting seeing some of these like older movies, like, and seeing snippets of them, and because it is kind of a unique thing to be able to say, hey, here's literally what Ethan looked like 30 years ago, because we have the footage, because the movies have been going that long. Same for all the cast that have been kind of recurring since you know then or thereabouts. So all right, obviously going exactly in order is going to be tough because it's a long movie, there's a lot of cutting around, so I'm going to sort of take it in sort of like just ideas here, right? And
all right, go ahead. If it's not, I do want to specifically call mention to the opening, like, this message will self-destruct VHS that Angela Bassett sends him.
Sure, yeah, we can talk about that.
All right.
And yeah, I mean, we can get about that now, because she basically explains that, you know, in the couple of months since the last movie, like, the entity has been infecting, you know, all these different countries. It's got control of, you know, various you know, everyone is collapsing. There's even, and this is something that doesn't even come up that much, barring like one character later, but they established that there's like a cult who loves the entity now and are talking about it like it's like there's their savior, the Antichrist, and they're like, oh, the entity's what we're all about. We're going to talk about how great it is. So that's in there, and it's not a mission though. She doesn't say your mission should you choose to accept it. She's basically just saying, hey, turn yourself in with that key you've got. Remember, the last movie was all about getting this key, and while the key is important here, it's like if you just said, "Oh, they just have the key" at the start of the story, it would it would change anything plot wise.
No, yeah, you just needed the 5-minute long scene of here was the previous mission, and then just show he walks away with the key afterwards. Like, you could easily have done that, and it would have changed anything. Yeah. Okay, so things in this intro that I had a little bit of an umbrage with. One, why did they set it 2 months afterwards? That's the part that gets me. I get it was probably mostly to let Tom Cruise grow out his hair, because he's just like a little bit shaggy now, so they just need to show some time has passed. But like, what in the previous movie led you to believe that they get this key and then they just sit around for 2 months? It seemed very urgent to me that they immediately go and find this submarine.
I think it's less about that side of it and more about just the idea that some time has passed just to like just so that we can jump in and all of like the government world leaders all understand what the entity is. Like, it's an established thing now that we don't have to explain to all the characters.
Yeah, and I do like the idea the entity has taken over pretty much all the media, and it's like photoshopping in real time. Nobody can trust anything digital, and it's all this big problem.
Okay.
What I don't like is
this gets into the thing that I was going to bring up, actually, is how little this actually comes up for the rest of the movie.
That's what I was about to say. Yeah.
It doesn't matter.
I like the idea of it, but they don't do it.
They never actually... I thought for sure, at some point, like, a message or something is going to be fake. It's going to turn out to be a misdirect by the entity, and it never once comes up at all, to the point where why even like have established any of this?
Yeah, I mean, I like it from the viewpoint of it forces them to be low tech, which is kind of what I liked about what I was positing in the last movie, is that all of these movies have been about all their high tech stuff. How do they deal without that? How do they manage to do these missions when they are unable to use their high-tech fancy spy stuff? But I do agree that I think that there should have been a moment where they're forced to like try to figure out whether or not a message is real or not, and it's like a critical thing. And Tom Cruise goes with his gut, turns out to be right or wrong or whatever, but it just never happens.
In fact, so there's a section of this movie set in a submarine, right? And if you've never seen Crimson Tide, the whole plot of that movie is that they get like the orders to launch a nuke, but then whilst they're in the process of doing it, they get a second batch of orders, which might be to cancel the nuke, but it gets interrupted. And then it becomes like this sort of debate between the captain and the XO if they should carry on with the order or not. But they're basically starting World War III if they do, so they should really like consider why they're doing it and what's the protocol here. And that becomes the whole plot of the movie, is that fight. All I could think thinking about that is that like you've got this thing that might have like given a fake order. Like surely at some point we could do something with a debate of like, do we trust what this order is? Are we doing what the entity wants? Are we doing what the actual order is from, the president or whoever it is,
Yeah, I think easiest way to deal with it, skipping ahead slightly, is a big part of this movie is we get this countdown timer of how long it's going to take for the entity to hack into the nuclear arsenal of everybody in the world. And there is this anxiety of launching the nukes before that happens. So you set up this idea of launching off all the nuclear warheads before it takes control as being this thing where if they get notice that all the rest of the world has lost control, that could have been it. That could have been the thing where it's like, we've just been told Russia lost control. Do we want to launch the nukes? But then they have to come like, okay, but how did we get that info? Was it through any point there a digital means? Could it have been faked? And then we find out that the entity actually doesn't have control and it like gives them extra time or something.
Yeah, there's ways they could have used that, and it never really comes up. I get that's one of those things that it felt like they set up a lot in the last movie, but somewhere along the way of making this one, they changed their minds about what they wanted to focus on, and they didn't go down that path. But the big thing for me that I want to get to here, which it doesn't come up until a little bit later when Tom Cruise actually speaks to the entity, which is also something so I want to talk about that and like what he finds out here, right? So the two big things here for me is that the entity straight up has like a voice, speaks in the third person, which I thought was interesting, and talks to Tom Cruise and kind of shows what the plan is. And what does it show Tom Cruise? What does it show Ethan Hunt? It straight up shows Judgment Day. It's Skynet launching all of the nukes and the entirety of the Earth being like covered in mushroom clouds. And we get specifically a focus on London being obliterated by a nuclear bomb. And I was like, this is kind of insane. I kind of love just how ridiculous this is that we're now doing an AI launching nukes. We're literally trying to prevent the Terminator world from happening. That's what we're fighting against now in this movie. Now, as the movie went on, it became more and more just like a Mission Impossible movie. But there's a chunk here near the start where I'm like, this is like jumping the shark in kind of an entertaining way. And not everyone's going to feel that way, but I was kind of like, I had like a sort of big grin in my face where I was like, I see why someone might hate this, but I kind of like how just over the top it is.
Yeah. No, I mean, obviously we've dealt with nuclear stuff prior in the series, but it has never been so pervasive. It's never been so destructive. This is, one character specifically points out, like, every time you take a mission, like, the number of lives that you're saving seems to double. Like, it's constantly growing. And now you're finally at the point where you have all of humanity in your hands, and you have to save them all. And I do appreciate that constant growth, even if now we are at the point where it has reached ludicrous proportions, where it's saying, okay, nuclear holocaust, how do you prevent it? One man, Ethan Hunt.
Well, Jesus Hunt is on the case, and he will die for your sins, he will save everyone, it's going to be a whole thing. I was just like, obviously there's some problems before that point. This is still in the section where there's a lot of like, rushed pacing and like everything from like him meeting Benji. We find out quite quickly that Luther's been working on taking down the entity to off-grid, but we also find out that he's like in like a makeshift like hospital like tent underground.
Yeah, he's sick with the "this is my final movie" itis.
Yes,
whatever that may be.
He's on his way out, but he's killed. He's killed. He's built the poison pill, which is something that if they get the source code for the entity, it will infect the entity. And here's another MacGuffin, right? He's built a MacGuffin on top of the key. Yes. This is the movie's main MacGuffin. It's actually a lot like see how the key had two halves, so there was like two MacGuffins that had to come together. This movie's the same. There's the poison pill, and then there's the source code thing on the submarine. They need the two parts and put them together. We're kind of doing the same two things again. But it's like, okay, he's built the poison pill. But this is the thing. For everything that I'm saying, there's a bit of rushedness here, there's also some nice stuff. Like, when he first shows up in the room and they kind of all, like reminisce, or not even reminisce, but just kind of like, joke around and bond and say, a couple of jokes, and they kind of, like, hug, and, like, Simon Pegg and the three of them are all kind of buddy-buddy. It's kind of nice. But obviously then it cuts ahead really quickly to the scene where Hayley Atwell comes back, because they're looking for. They think Gabriel's going to show up at like a party, and it does feel so rushed because Tom Cruise just says it. Like all of the exposition, because this scene was completely added about 2 months ago, so it was not baked into the story in any way. Which is actually kind of wild because it thematically sets up why Hayley Atwell's character is going to be so important at the end of the movie. Like her skills are going to be invaluable.
I guarantee you that whatever original scene they had there used the timing line in a different way, but they just had that. They were like, all right, we need to have her in this sequence in order to make it work, but she has to say this line still because it pays off later. Yeah,
because basically, like two guys try to apprehend Cruise and she walks past and pickpockets them, and it just ends with both of them getting tranked and they wake up like, tied to a chair. She's tied to like a pole, and Gabriel's going to come in and do his whole thing. I think the reason why they wanted to do this scene with her being introduced this way is they didn't like that she was initially in the original cut of the movie. The first time you see her, she's already like a captive, and it was like, no, we want to give her like she's good at stuff. Like, let's give her a nice entrance before we put her in this situation. I kind of appreciate that. I get it as well. Like I think it makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, now that because I didn't know this going in. Now that you mentioned that. They do specifically have in that sequence Ethan being like, why are you here? What are you doing? And it would make so much sense to open it up with that.
Yeah.
Like that makes all the sense in terms of getting that. And you're right, that other sequence has nothing going on. Like it is tacked on there 100% to be like, all right, she's competent. And also they do a little bit of an elaboration and explanation as to like where they need to go and what they need to do right before they get tranked.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a little bit to it.
Yeah, I think the transitions from these scenes, from cutting to that scene where he says we're trying to find Gabriel and he runs into her, and then they get tranked, and then we cut to them waking up in this room, tied to chairs and whatnot. I'm like, this is where it feels super rushed. And I feel like, we're just bouncing through locations and ideas, and things are just moving at a breakneck pace. Yeah. And then, of course, I think this scene's also guilty. Whatever changes they made, they definitely redubbed most of Gabriel's dialogue, because it looked ADR'd.
Oh, yeah.
There's also, I think, a lot of extra artificial shadow added onto the screen to try and hide his face at times, so they could change some lines of dialogue for whatever other changes they've made so it would fit. It definitely felt like, again, a lot of sloppiness with how this early stuff plays out from a technical and kind of structural point of view.
Yeah. No, I definitely noticed there was a single line where his mouth was just not moving to whatever was being said, and I guess they couldn't work around it. And I was like, all right, that was ADR'd. But yeah, you telling me that there was some restructuring here at the beginning, even up to 2 months ago, definitely explains that.
Yeah, and Gabriel. Well, first of all, Gabriel still sucks. Let's just say that he was one of the weakest parts of the last movie. He still sucks here. I think what's more egregious here, though, is just how quickly he seems to have completely changed as a character in terms of his motivations. We get one or two lines of dialogue that basically says, oh yeah, he's now the machine's basically disappointed with him because he failed so spectacularly at the end of the last movie and Ethan outsmarted him, that now Gabriel doesn't want to help the entity, he wants to gain control like everyone else did before, and that's what his goal is now.
Yeah.
And that transition from what his previous goal was to this feels so again, it feels like it was tacked on quickly in an edit somewhere where it's not properly fleshed out. There's no like see if you got a scene where he like does change, where you can see it in his face where he gets angry and he sort of like vows to like do something else instead. That'd be one thing. But it happens so quickly that you just kind of like, okay, I guess he's just the opposite now.
Well, it bothers me as well because in the last movie they had that whole thing about how I'm going to call her by her character name Paris, but Palm.
Palm, yeah.
How she was going to betray them because Tom Cruise, and they were able to see that. Like, before she even thought that she was going to betray them, she was already being tagged as that because the AI is able to think that far ahead. And for some reason, the AI just disavowed him because he failed, but like didn't see that in the plan, or maybe it did and it was still just, I don't know, it felt weird to me this all of a sudden changed halfway through here just because he failed this one particular mission.
I mean, it feels rushed for sure. I think the idea with that is, though, that the entity saw different outcomes, and they played with that a lot in the last movie. Like, the entity's expecting either this A scenario or B scenario, and either way it wins. I think the whole point of that, though, is that Ethan Hunt is so damn good that he did something the entity didn't predict. You know, he won in a way that the entity didn't see coming. And because of that, like, he didn't see it. And that's kind of why Ethan's the chosen one now.
I mean, I would have been fine with that if the movie had presented that, but it felt like the entity was always in control of the situation, even right up to the end, because they said how many different paths it could see.
It feels, I mean, that just feels undercooked, though. I don't think you can sort of like lynch like or pin anything on that and say that's like a suitable explanation for something, just because honestly, after the opening act of this movie, both the entity and Gabriel, while they're the reason that things are happening, they fade into the background. It's all about going to find the things that they need to take them down. Like they're not like a constant element where you're thinking about them all the time. So that's definitely a thing to consider. And one of the things that they also do, of course, is they bring up this idea to tie in what I was saying there about Tom Cruise or Ethan defying the odds and doing something the entity couldn't predict. That's something they keep playing with in this movie, and it's something that he says, hey, if the different leaders in the world, or if I work with my enemies, if we actually just do something that the entity couldn't predict, which is actually unite against it, it wouldn't stand a chance. And I kind of like poking the bear at that, and I do think that's where the Shea Wiggum character, the one thing that felt missing to me, it's a shame that he's missing for like such a large chunk of the movie after the initial stuff with him, but I think the one thing that's missing for me is that instead of just having a, oh, I respect you now handshake at the end, I think what I was expecting early on, and what I think would have been better, is that if he had to make a choice before everything wrapped up, where he had to choose to help Ethan. So, and it would basically be like cementing what Ethan proposes to him when they first have a conversation, which is, if we do what the entity doesn't expect, if we just work together, then we win. And the idea that would pay off and that he would actually help Ethan to succeed somewhere near the end. And of course, that just doesn't happen, and he just shakes his hand afterwards. But, you know.
I was fully expecting the trademark Mission Impossible, oh, it turns out he was actually working with Ethan all along, sort of reveal at the end. But then, you know, it plays it straight. It just doesn't. I'm like, oh, all right, well, I guess fine.
Yeah, I'd have been fine with that. I'd have been fine if it wasn't a predetermined thing and it was just him like making a choice in the moment as well. I think either way would have worked. But that's the stuff that feels like it got lost in the reshuffling of whatever they changed between the initial ideas and what it is now. Well, we'll talk about the other thing with him in a minute though, because we're not quite there yet. Right? Obviously, there's another thing to talk about, which I'm leaving out.
Oh God.
Yeah. So. Yeah, all of this, though, there's a bit of a chase. For some reason, they thought the pin drop for the opening title sequence to kick in was right before they chase Gabriel, after they get, like, up from, like, being, like, tied up. And it didn't feel like a big moment that the movie seemed to think it was. And I'm like, okay, whatever. I guess this is the moment.
Well, they play it off a comedy beat, because Tom Cruise, you know, they're about to be tortured and all that, and then Ethan manages to break out along with Hayley Atwell. And then they just hold on this thing where Tom is just going to town murdering these guys, but they hold on the shot of Hayley reacting to it, and then they cut back to Tom now with a bloodied shirt, comes up to her, just like multiple times, just being like, hey, all right, we gotta go. Don't worry about them. They were gonna hurt you anyway, but like, we really gotta go. And then they start the theme. It's like, what a strange moment to come into the Mission Impossible theme proper, but all right, sure.
I think based on everything else we've already said about this opening act, I'm going to say that this wasn't initially meant to be the cut to like opening titles moment. I think there was probably something else that was going to do it on, and when things moved around, they just had to find a new place for it that wasn't too late into the movie. Although arguably, I actually think it'd have been quite a ballsy move to sort of save it for like a ridiculously late moment. Not I don't even mean the back half. I just mean like once things are set up, like basically the moment the president gives him an aircraft carrier and you realize she's going to like give him all the resources he needs to maybe save the world. I think that's the moment. As much as that would be like 45 plus minutes in, I think that would have been ballsy to have it then go to the opening titles and hear the theme at that point.
Yeah, I without spoiling too much, I know we're in spoilers, but I do want to have a flow to this.
Yes.
I think that it needs to still happen before the first major character death. I don't think it works after that point.
That's fair, which is, I guess, what we're getting to, because Gabriel, of course, is like, oh, someone you care about will die tonight, and he does these monologues. Anyway, before he goes to see what goes on with that, that's when he goes into the little, like matrix chamber that he talks to the entity in.
Can someone please explain to me what the hell this is? Because we actually skipped over the fact that before we even get to before we get to the tape from the president, we get a slow zoom in on this box in the middle of this empty room with no explanation for what it is. I guess we're supposed to recognize it from the train sequence in the last movie, because that's what Gabriel was in. But they just have a couple little lines of a monologue of Tom Cruise saying like, oh, the oath of the IMF is you do whatever from the shadows, blah, blah, blah. And then we cut into the rest of the movie. And then at this point, we find out that that box is actually being stored in this underground bunker where Gabriel was having them tortured. And it's the way that he converses with the entity. It's the way he talks to it.
I feel like the entity could just also like send some text messages as well. Yeah. That seems like an option.
I control all of technology, but if you want your VR thing, sure, whatever.
Actually, that reminds me just briefly. I am so glad that they didn't bother trying to expand on the backstory thing about like the woman that Ethan got killed before he joined the IMF. Because the last movie set that up as if it was going to be something they were going to focus on, and I never liked the idea of fleshing it out, so I'm so glad they dropped it and they reference it briefly, but it's not something they go into or explain who she was or anything like that.
I agree, I'm happy they dropped it. I wish they had the foresight not to foreshadow it so much in 7, because it's going to be such a weird watch now, going between the two.
Yeah, but if they were going to drop something, I'm glad they dropped that. Because it was the thing I was dreading the most about this movie, was like going into that stuff.
When we got to the bit of the president who writes down that date on a piece of paper and passes it over to that one general commander lady, I thought for sure that was going to be the callback to it, because it's far enough in the past that it seems like it should have been at the beginning of his career.
Well, no, it's not the beginning of his career.
No, it isn't. It turns out not, but I thought that would be like what we were referencing, just in universe.
But it's not the beginning of his career, I know that, because it's the date the first movie came out.
It is, which is that little bit more of them just saying like, yep, we're doing the callback.
It's a nod, but it's not one, like, I didn't know it was the exact date, but as soon as I saw 1996, I'm like, oh, are they going to tie this into the first movie in some way or something? And it's not, right. It's just the date's just special to the meta reasons for the franchise. But, But I think they say, at one point, Kittredge says it was 35 years ago. So I think the implication is that he was already in IMF for 5 years in the first
which
movie.
Makes sense, because he seemed very familiar with the team going into Mission Impossible 1. So it would make sense he's been around for a while.
Yeah. It was so funny, though, when they were doing the quick cuts in the entity's eye at the start of all the past movies, and you just straight up see Emilio Estevez again. I'm like, oh, that's weird to see a clip of him in this one. All right.
It's like, and you've lost so many people along the way, and they show Emilio Estevez and think, I'm like, oh, he wasn't even credited in that movie, and you're calling him back? Does he make money from this now?
So he talks to the, we already kind of talked about this. He sees the Judgment Day, he sees the nukes launching, all that stuff, and it tells Ethan that, hey, you're going to take me to this safe place in South Africa. It's like a nuclear like bunker, basically, where all the tech and knowledge is stored in case of an apocalypse, blah, 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 blah. says, you're going to be the chosen one now that helps me. And of course, Ethan's not going to actually want to do that because, you know, obvious reasons. But then he runs to Luther, though. He gives the rest a mission. Basically, he says, hey, you have to go do this. So go on your merry way. I do want to point out here, just before we move on, I do love that despite them needing Gabriel alive, as soon as Paris sees him, she just starts opening fire, and that's like her little character thing for this movie. She just wants to kill Gabriel as quickly as she can, regardless of the consequences.
I think someone makes the comment of, like, she takes the shot, and so I think it's Benji comes up and is just like, no, didn't you hear Ethan? We need him alive. And she's like, I don't. Bang, bang, bang.
Yeah, we kind of skipped over the scene where they go to get her, because that was like right before the try to find Gabriel scene. And obviously I love that they go and get her, and it's actually the only scene in the movie where we get the masks. The masks aren't as big a part of this one.
That's right, yeah.
But actually, this is important to mention this scene, actually, because Shea Wiggum's escorting her with his partner, right? Who he had in the last movie as well. It's the same guy.
Degas,
yeah. So obviously the two like random cops that are walking with them, they turn out to be Ethan and Benji, and of course Briggs tries to fight with them. That's Shea Wiggum's character. They knock him out. There is a moment though where Pom goes to shoot him when she gets access to a gun, and like Ethan has to like shove her away and be like, no, none of that now. But the end of the scene, there's a bit of a standoff where Pom's got a gun and Degas has a gun. And like Benji and Ethan are like, hey, we're all friends here, and kind of explaining. And he's like, hey, Degas, the entity wants you to turn this in because it's counting on it. Don't do that. Like and they showed some signs in the last movie that he was like maybe sympathetic or considering that Ethan was doing the right thing. They kind of teased at that. I will say though, it does feel very rushed, because the end of this scene only implied to me that he turned turned an eye, right? He let them go, right? He didn't turn them in. That's all I got from the end of the scene. And then when we go to like the team running in to help Ethan at Gabriel's place, where this VR coffin is and all that, Degas is just here. He's part of the team now. And I'm like, whoa, what 3 scenes did we cut out here? Because there was definitely more to this.
Yeah, I mean, even if it was just expanding on that one scene of just like Degas saying his motivation for wanting to come with, it's so fast. It's just like we have to sprint to the point where he gets in that coffin, because that's where the rest of the plot kicks off.
Yeah, so that is again another reason why this first chunk feels so rushed, is things like that. So they get Pom back very quickly. They get this new guy on the team very quickly. But then we get the big tragic kind of like, we all know Luther's about to die. He's going to, go out in the final movie kind of thing.
Yeah, they show in the coffin, they have the AI be like, hey, check out what Gabriel did. And then like smash cut to a nuke being put down right outside of his little makeshift hospital room. Yeah,
and Gabriel traps him in there and intentionally leaves him tools, right? And Luther even points out, because Ethan's like trying to get in because he's sort of locked out of the room, and he's like trying to like find his way in. And Luther explains, this is a nuclear weapon. If this goes off, it'll annihilate the entirety of London. But I can take out the nuke part, I can dismantle that part, so it's just the detonator. It'll just be like a little local blast. It'll kill me in the tunnels, but it won't, it'll save the city. And Luther makes the point of saying, hey, we both know that I should be on this side of the fence because I can do this, and you should be on that side because you can go and take down the entity. This is the right thing, and he makes a couple of references to the first movie. He uses his old nickname at one point.
Yeah, I will say part of the setup here also as to what Gabriel wanted and why he did this was because in the stupidest possible scene, we had him holding the poison pill on a little lanyard, and he hands it over to Tom Cruise and says, take this, and when you get to the submarine, put it in there, and it'll automatically poison the whole thing. And then Ethan, because he's so sentimental,
well, hold on,
puts it back into his pocket and says, don't worry about that. I'll be catching you later.
Hold on. There's something that I need to point out here. You're right on all this, right? This is a scene that happens. He tries to give it to Ethan. Ethan says, no, you can do it yourself. He puts it back in his pocket. This scene, though, where we see this, happens after Luther's already died. We don't see that he tried to give it to Tom Cruise and Tom Cruise gives it back. until after
That's right.
he's dead and Gabriel's already stolen it from Luther. So it feels especially dumb because we've already seen the outcome at that point.
Yeah, we see him working on the poison pill around Tom Cruise and Benji. And then we see Gabriel stealing the poison pill when he attacks Luther and puts him in there. So the implication in the audience's mind is, oh, he never got a chance to pass it off to him. That's so sad. But no, he did. And Ethan just ruined it.
Ethan just gave the villain a chance to come and get it so that we have to have another problem to deal with.
Of course.
So, yeah, so we get the big thing where Ethan eventually accepts that he has to run away and just barely gets out of the blast range. You know, the cloud of dirt is chasing him as he's running down the tunnels. It's a whole thing. And yeah, I think I expected at least one of the main characters that have been around for a while to die in this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just in case they decide to keep going, this is the bow out period. Whenever anybody wants to leave, hop off now, or else you're stuck for another 4 movies.
Yeah, I do, like, obviously when we did Ghost Protocol, we talked about how Renner has been set up as maybe the replacement, and I was wondering halfway through this, like, is there a world in which they want to keep doing these movies, but, you know, Tom Cruise might not necessarily go away. He might like stick around as like a sort of like the old character who's like, okay, I can't be jumping off planes and stuff anymore, but I can be the older guy in the ear, like giving advice and like talking to the young action hero type thing. Because I think a lot of these side characters could absolutely still be around. Like, there's no reason why you can't have Atwell and Palm and, hey, maybe bring back Renner, which we were kind of hoping for in this one. Like, I wouldn't have minded that.
All right. Full disclosure, I was so disappointed. By the time we hit the end of third act, there was no Renner. I was so upset.
Oh, I know.
They brought back Angela Bassett. They literally could have just said she's gone, but they couldn't bring back Renner, who they never said what happened to him.
Yeah, and they brought back someone way more surprising than that, which we'll get to. I don't want to say it out loud quite yet.
So disappointed.
So it's like, okay, we've set things up, and Ethan, I think at one point Ethan even says, before he goes to Luther, after he talked to the entity, he kind of just mumbles at one point, I need to get caught. Well, that's the only path forward. So it's very clear that like after Luther, he was intending to just be taken in by, you know, Shea Wiggum and co.
Yeah, during the VR AI talk thing, he gets out and then he just kind of like crazy person mutters a bunch of stuff and like writes down some things in a notebook, tells Benji he's in charge of the team and like they have to go do a specific thing, and then just leaves. I didn't get anything from that sequence. Like, it was him just mumbling a bunch of words and then he storms off because we know he has to get to Luther very quickly. So eventually everything became clear, but in that moment, I didn't think I was supposed to know anything from there.
I mean, that was the one thing I got from it, actually, was him saying I need to be caught. It was like, I need to go in and, you know, get that. I caught that part. But yeah, it's a lot of stuff that doesn't necessarily mean that much yet. But he gets taken in, and Shea Wiggum Briggs is sitting with them on the plane as they're going to top secret place where they're doing all their strategies from, blah, 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 whatever military base it is. Yeah. And he sits down, and we get the reveal through their conversation that he changed his name. He used to have a different name. Now, I'm glad they explained and showed little flashbacks here, because I didn't remember this character's name, because why would I? It turns out that Shea Wiggum's character, and they kind of teased this in the last one, because they said that there was something personal, even though he'd never met Ethan personally, and that is that his father was John Voight's character from Mission Impossible 1.
I'm not gonna lie, I was a little bit awestruck in that moment. This isn't the ballsiest thing they did. Like, there's still a ballsier thing they call back to, but the fact that they were like, yep, nope, secret son you didn't know about, and I obviously he was the villain of the first movie. We have bad blood there, so it's this now tension of your past is caught up with you, Ethan, and he has a personal vendetta against you. But then he immediately comes back and says, like, I don't care about my dad. Like, that's why I changed my name. Like, whatever. Like, if he was bad, so be it. However, you keep on going rogue, Ethan, And that's not cool.
I do kind of like that his hatred of Ethan is that you keep going rogue, and I'd be fine with everything you've ever done if they were all orders, but they weren't. And maybe I'm giving it too much credit here. Maybe there was, again, I assume there was more stuff cut because it feels like there was stuff cut. But maybe part of like the expansion of this is this idea that his dad went rogue in a villainous way. So he's kind of really anchored himself to this idea of following the chain of command, of being like, you know, really harshly like believing in the rules and trying to separate himself from who his father was, and that would also lead to him changing his name. And I to be fair, I did also like this idea that he's not entirely convinced that the story of like, oh, you know, my dad was the villain and he killed the entire team. Like, I get why he would be skeptical of that. That's fine too. I did really like though Ethan saying, hey, the entity will never predict us working together, and us doing things that the entity won't predict, and enemies coming together to like work against it, and then putting out his hand. I like that setup. Like I said, I think the suitable payoff for it would have been him helping Ethan before the third act climax had happened. I feel like, you know, him choosing to help him, maybe like turning on Kittredge and giving Ethan like a chance to go and save the day. Something like that would have been perfect.
Even in the last movie, we had that moment where there was the shootout from Paris, and he had to let Ethan go. Like, there was no other option there, and he just kind of resigned. It was just like, yeah, all right, I'll catch you soon. But, like, there was nothing like that in this one. Even if it was something as simple as that, the little resignation of, like, I don't have to hunt you, but I don't have to help you either. Like, that sort of thing. But nothing. It was just 100% hunting right up until the moment where he's like, oh, you did it? Cool.
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of funny that the first half of this, I mean, technically the whole movie, but especially the first half, is lots of characters basically summarizing what you're suggesting, Ethan, is impossible. And it can't be done. And all of it is building up to him doing the thing so they can all react and be like, in fact, literally, McQuarrie says, that son of a bitch, he did it. Like, he has that line at the end of the movie.
Yeah, but I mean, like, that was just Fallout. Like, that's all Fallout was that exact same sort of thing. I'm like, there's no way anybody could do this. It's too outside your range, Ethan. And then he does it.
Yeah, but that wasn't... I mean, there was obviously nukes in play there. This is literally Judgment Day from Terminator that's going to happen. This is every single civilization on Earth is going to go down.
Fair enough.
You know, the stakes have raised. But... So they go to here, and we get the whole scene that was in the trailer where they're like, so who's this Ethan guy? So he broke into CIA, Langley. Okay, that's a ballsy move. Oh, he was at the Kremlin bombing.
They really make sure they hold on the Langley thing and show you a good portion of it because of what comes later.
But you know, it's like, oh, he was at the Kremlin thing. He gassed all these people in this meeting a couple of months ago, and one of them goes, wait a minute. Half of you would have been in that meeting, and yeah, a couple of the faces were in that meeting. And it's like, okay, so this guy's a menace then. But of course, the president comes in, and we get all the like Tom Cruise making his pitch and saying, Madam President, I need an aircraft carrier, and I need to get to a submarine so I can go to where the Sevastopol is, so I can get the source code, and we can take down the entity. This is probably a good place to jump in here with something else that I think was a little bit muddy in the movie. So up until this point in the film, it's heavily reiterated several times when it comes up that Ethan wants to kill the entity. One of the arguments against that is that because it's so infected, like, into everything in cyberspace, that it will completely destabilize and kill everything. So the economy is going to collapse. Like, society as we know it will collapse if you kill the entity because it's so ingrained. Now, I'm assuming that the plan they actually come up with later to trap the entity in a specific place circumvents that, but they never, I don't think, actually explain that. So in the third act, when they were doing all their plans, I was still thinking, but why isn't this still going to just, you know, cripple the entire system? Like, it feels like you haven't clearly explained that you've avoided that somehow. But
all right, if we're talking about that at that point, I do want to just right now say, I think that the third act does a great job of explaining where each character needs to be, what their particular action is for the thing to happen, and a good structure of making you understand the relation between them. However, I could not, gun to my head, tell you what the actual honest to God result of the plan is, because they are just glossing by it so quickly of like, we let this character do this thing so that this will happen, but then we're going to do this. And then something happens to interrupt the plan and everything shifts, but somehow everything is still in the same place. It makes zero sense. And I've sat and thought on it for over 24 hours now, and I still have no idea.
Yeah, I mean, the plots have always been convoluted. I think this isn't convoluted in the same way, though. This is just kind of a bit messy, I guess. This isn't the same kind of like, oh, who's who and who's connected to who and who's double-crossing who. There's none of that, really. That's not what this movie's doing. But it's kind of messy in a different way that feels, like you're saying.
It just feels like we built up, there's 3 different sides now, and it's just a little bit complicated as to what each side wants. And then somewhere in the middle of it, they introduce a 4th side of things, and it just throws everything out the window, where I really don't understand what happened.
Yeah, so the nitty-gritty details are a bit in the messy side. However, I do think once we get to the point where Ethan is saying, hey, give me a aircraft carrier so I can go to a submarine, so I can go do this thing. This is the moment, this is the sequence or the part of the movie, maybe even a little bit before then, when it's everyone kind of like explaining who Ethan Hunt is to like all these chiefs of staff and whoever. This is where I think the movie starts to like stop being messy. Like, it starts to fit into place a bit, right? I'm not saying there's no problems after that point, but from this point to the end, I'm like, okay, I'm kind of into it. Things are getting a bit simpler and more straightforward, and we can understand what we're doing here and where we're going. And there is this kind of like maybe nice side to it of like maybe putting some trust in Ethan, who has saved the day more times than not. Because the president basically acts like she's not agreeing with them and is not going to give him the resources, but slyly does it anyway. Basically just so that no one else can try and stop her. So Ethan's taken to, what he thinks is going to be a holding cell, but it's actually a chopper to like take him out to a carrier. And she gives him a letter to give to Waddingham's character, because she's the captain of the ship, to like, try and convince her that this is what they should do. So there's a lot of like try to convince people to go on faith of like, this is the right thing to do, help me and we can maybe save the world kind of thing.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of that.
I mean, that's recurring, 3-4 different times in this among various different military people. Obviously the president, then this captain, then the submarine officer, then the people who work under the submarine officer. Yep.
and arguably even a bit more in the third act as well. But it's...
Oh, and the B team goes with that Russian team up in Alaska. They have to convince him as well. It doesn't work, but they try at least.
Oh, they try it? Yeah. Because it's actually when he's explaining his plan to... I don't know, was he explaining to the president or was he explaining to the captain of the ship? But either way, Ethan's explaining the plan, and this is where it starts intercutting to Benji explaining their side of the plan on the plane with the rest of the team. And it's like, okay, so they need to get the exact coordinates of the Sevastopol. So the team's mission, so Benji's leading the team, which is him, Grace, Hayley Atwell's character, what's his name? Degas, and Paris, right? Pom's character. And they're going to this station on this island and near the North Pole. It's not actually the North Pole, but it's near the North Pole. And it's this station. What did you say? Alaska?
It's Alaska, yeah.
I thought it was a different place, but maybe if it's part of Alaska technically, then fair enough. But it's
it's up in the Aleutian Islands, which I think are split between Alaska and Russia. I'd assume the U.S. side.
I would presume too, yes. So they're going there to this station that's basically just there to record data and things, and basically it might have like where the sub went down because it might have recorded like a whatever, right? So it's okay. They're going for that.
They got a big sonar system that records all of like underground noise, and one day it picked up this really loud boom back in 2012, which I forget how they got the exact date of it, but they figured out that the sub went down in 2012, and so therefore...
That opening scene from the last movie with the sub was in 2012, which we never knew in the last movie, but it does make sense though, given like all the bodies floating up and where the keys are now, that it was some time ago. It makes sense that it wasn't just like a month before the start of the movie.
But I feel like in the movie, it felt like that was the implication. Like the bodies came up and then everyone kind of went there to go get the key stuff immediately.
Yeah, but the keys weren't with the bodies, so the keys were spread out all over the planet at that point.
True.
So
I mean, you're right. It explains it. It just felt like that at the time.
Yeah, the pacing made it feel like that. But like, I mean, I have no problem with that being like a decade ago in hindsight. But whatever.
That's fair. Yeah.
So they're going to get that, and the whole idea is that they have to get these coordinates. Obviously, there's some complications when they get there, but they have to get the coordinates. They have to radio them through old school, technology to the sub, which Tom Cruise has to convince the submarine captain to raise the depth so they can actually get a signal in Morse code, which will give them the exact coordinates to go to. So Ethan has to go and get the thing out of Sevastopol, which is going to be dangerous and it's going to be deep water and all the rest of it. And at the end of all this, he has to go straight up to the ice and hopefully, because the team's also got the coordinates and they're on top of the ice, they'll chainsaw through the ice, get him out, and they've got their own little, decompression, inflatable chamber they're going to put him in because he needs to go through decompression. And I'm like, okay. And suitably, Waddingham and the team, who are both reacting simultaneously with the intercutting, are like, that's the plan? Are you psychotic? That is a 99.9% chance of you just being dead. And he's like, yep.
Mm-hmm. Well, they even specifically point out, it's okay if he dies for a little bit because the ice will keep him okay. So he can die. That's fine. We just don't want to wait too long.
Yes, he'll be kept alive, or not even kept alive, but he will be effectively frozen enough that he'll be, kept fresh for a little bit so that we can resuscitate him.
Yeah. That makes sense. I mean, that now brings the Ethan Hunt has died counter up to 4, which I feel like he's pushing his luck there, but whatever. The one other thing that I love about that is it does, as they're explaining this sequence, mentally I was brought back to the Burj Khalifa explanation in 4 of the, it's all this timing has to be right and you can immediately see all the points of failure. It was that level of complexity where I was understanding everything, but you can see just how complicated it all really is.
Yeah, which I like. I do feel like a lot of this movie, you can sort of feel like inspiration from various movies, like past Mission Impossibles, all kind of coming in together here. So probably the easiest way to sort this out, even though it's obviously cutting between the two, is just to stick to one side. So I think we'll stick with the team first, and we'll talk about what they get up to. So they go there, and very quickly, on the other side, once Cruise is on the submarine, they realize, there's already Russians at this station. There's one of their subs is right next to it, so they've got company. So Benji's like, let me do the talking. We'll go in, and he knocks on the door. It's a little station where 1 or 2 people live that keep maintenance on this stuff, this tech. And this woman who's native to the area opens the door, speaks a different language, and they go in, and she basically calls out her husband, and the husband walks out. And this is where us watching all these movies in the last little bit of time paid off, because as soon as this guy walked out, I nearly did a spit take. It's the guy who had to shit a lot because he was the one working in the vault at the CIA in the first movie. They brought this guy back.
It is such a pull. It's such a pull that we managed to get this guy back here. And it's not like we're going to have him for this scene because, at the end of that sequence, they said, ship this guy off to Alaska because he messed up so badly. But, he's a character. He sticks around.
Yeah.
They give him some depth here.
Which I will say, I think they go a little bit on the nose later when he talks to Ethan much, much later in the story, where Ethan was like, hey, I feel like I should probably apologize because your entire life got messed up because I did that whole vault break-in thing. And he's like, oh no, I met my wife. I'm much happier. If anything, you saved my life. And I'm like, okay, it's okay for Ethan to have some regret, okay? It's okay for Ethan to feel a little bad about something. Don't give him this complete, thank you, ma'am, kind of thing that he's doing here.
The only thing Ethan regrets is Mission Impossible 2. Everything else is fine.
Everyone regrets Mission Impossible 2.
Well, okay, so I'm looking through the list here. It turns out this has been revealed by this point. Can we say what the link to Mission Impossible 3 is here, real quick? As long as we're doing this other review.
All right, yeah, okay. This is maybe the place to bring this in. So,
yes,
much early on, there is a brief reference. Someone brings up the rabbit's foot, right? It's when Gabriel's talking to Ethan, And he kind of compares the situation they're in to when his wife was tortured, even though I think this scene was actually a lot closer to Elsa's introduction in 5, to be honest, visually. It made me think of that way more. But he brings up the rabbit's foot, and I kind of like lean in and goes, no, they're not. They're not going to answer what the rabbit's foot is. And then obviously, you know, the scene moves on, things happen, blah, blah, blah. And then a bit later, holy shit, we actually get it. The rabbit's foot was the initial source code for the entity. They are tying it all together, even though, and they kind of like try and wave this away in the scene, because obviously we remember a biohazard logo on that thing. It was clearly meant to be some sort of bio-organic weapon or something.
I think they just they said in the hand wave, they're like, it wasn't a bioweapon at all. That was a lie, just so people didn't like try to open it up and mess with it directly. Like it was always code and whatnot. And bravo, movie. You managed to make, because if you look at it, if you really look at the Mission Impossible franchise, the current iteration, the idea of an ongoing like character arcs and plot really begin at 4.
Yes.
That's kind of where it, if you're talking about the wife subplot, you can go back into 3. But between Shea Wiggum and between the rabbit's foot, they have successfully interwoven 1 and 3 to being critical to everything else going on.
Notably, I'm noticing an absence of the number 2 there. 2 still feels left in no man's land. That's weird.
We don't talk about that.
No, it is, because you're right. Like, 4 onwards aren't referenced as much, but it doesn't feel like they need to be, because 4 felt like it set the template for what the rest of the movies tried to in some way be. So it feels like the franchise has felt pretty, I mean, not consistent in quality per se, but consistent in what it's going for. Yeah. But yeah, you're right. This heavily ties in 1 and 3. The wife thing was the one thing from 3 that kind of came back a few times, but 1 and 3 now feel like more interwoven between all the other stuff. And obviously this also adds this idea that Ethan feels guilty because he did this to save his wife, but what he actually did was steal the initial source code from China, which was then further developed by the US and then somehow made its way to Russia, and you know all this stuff has happened as a result. So there's like a guilt element.
It was a virus uploaded to the Russian sub,
yeah. So you know it's a whole thing, and I mean, like obviously this was not the plan in Mission Impossible 3 because frankly there was no plan with the rabbit's foot. JJ did not think of a goddamn thing, but.
Oh my God, you're right. They just actually solved a JJ mystery box.
They did.
They actually went ahead and did it. Good on them.
So, I admit, as far as things that got a reaction out of me, obviously the guy from Langley walking out did get something, but arguably the biggest reaction out of a reference or a connection to a past movie is when they straight up explained what the rabbit's foot was and connected it to the entity, and I sat up and I was like, holy shit, the ball's on you, movie, for doing this.
Yeah. I think the only thing that I would have wanted, and I'm kind of glad they didn't because we weren't super keen on those movies, but I think just to really tie it all together, I wanted there to be some connection between that doomsday cult that they were talking about and the disciples and all that stuff from
the syndicate.
5 and 6.
Yeah.
Get that just a little bit tied in where we can feel like everything really has built up to this moment, where everything is tied together here.
So anyway, so we get this guy back, and he's, seems pretty chill, all things considered. But the Russians are already here. That's kind of the reveal. They all sort of pop out and hold him at gunpoint. And there's a bit of back and forth where the Russians like, hey, like, once he's, because all the backups of all this data are on old floppy drives. There's no disc reader here. But Benji's going to make one out of like an old vinyl like record player or something. Okay, whatever. He's that much of a genius. But they're like, hey, we'll let you all go once we've got what we need. And Benji's like, wow, would you believe that if I said that to you? And he's like, no, I don't suppose I would. And then Hayley Atwell tries to jump in and appeal to him and like, hey, like, why are we on the opposite sides here? We're all fighting the entity. Why should this be like a country versus country thing? I'm not even an American, damn it. Like, I'm not even in the same country. Paris is French. Like, this is like a makeup of like multiple nations here. Come on.
If you notice here, the only person who represents America is the CIA guy, and he's been stuck here forever, so screw him.
No, Degas. He
I forgot
America.
Degas was here. Yeah.
He's
Fair
here.
enough. All right, kill him. That's fine.
But yeah, we got in fact, yeah, we actually outnumbered the English people outnumber the Americans, in fact, on the team right now. Well, obviously if Tom was here it'd be equal, but like, you know, the current team led by Benji. Apparently England's reigning supreme for whatever reason.
Yeah.
So
I do like in this sequence that like they do make the point of saying that the Russians aren't inherently evil in this scene. Like it's not like they're trying to like work for the entity or whatever. They are pointing out that right now there's maybe 3 or 4 countries that still have access to their nukes, Russia being one of them, and they're just trying to get to this before that becomes a problem. They're just trying to get on top of that.
yeah, I think when it's all introduced, they're like, hey, all the countries that have got nuclear arsenals have lost them except the US, the UK, Russia, and China. And then at the end of that scene where they explain it, the UK, like, you know, they've got a big map that's color-coded, so the UK blinks to red, and like, no, we're down to 3. Yep. And it's like, oh no, and then China goes like halfway through the movie, and then it's like, you know, ticking down to Russia, then ticking down to the US, and all the rest of it. So, yeah, so there's a little bit of like, you know, sitting in this hostage situation. As it plays out though, one of my favorite things in this scene actually though is every so often it cuts to Paris, it cuts to Pom, and like you can tell she's looking around the room like, oh, she's ready to like unleash, like she's ready to take out these Russians, and that was part of the fun suspense of the scene for me. But of course, the main plot point is that our CIA man here from Langley, we should probably get a name for him, but because I don't remember it. And
William Dunlow.
Dunlow, that sounds right. So Dunlow actually kind of whispers to Benji, hey, by the way, I kind of destroyed the backup for those coordinates because they kind of seemed important at the time. There was a lot of cover-up. We actually get a small cameo in flashback form to Carrie Elwes, who shows up to like steal the data in 2012. Doesn't say anything, just walks in the room, and I was like, oh, hey, it's him. He died in the last one. Very cool. So he's like, but I memorized the coordinates. I've got them. So we can try and broadcast. So they do a whole thing where they say they have to go feed the dogs, and the wife and Hayley Atwell go out to do that, which separates them. When they fight him, gunshots are fired, so the ones inside the main house start to like, you know, react to that, and immediately like Pom and Adegas start like, you know, fighting the bad guys, and there's a lot of, you know, near misses, a fire starts, and it's like, hey, you have to go up and send the coordinates, like go and transmit them. And so it's Dunlow who runs up to the radio and is like, and I thought for sure Dunlow was going to die here because he did a whole sweet goodbye to his wife. It felt like, oh, this is going to be his big heroic moment before he dies. Of course, at this point, I didn't realize we had to have him give forgiveness to Ethan for his sins. But like, it really felt, and obviously this plays quite well because when it's intercut into the stuff with Tom Cruise in the submarine, it's like, hey, this is our last chance. This is our last like time we can go up to the surface and like get the transmission. So if they don't do it this time, we're done, and we'll never be able to go where you want to go. So, you know, they're doing the whole race against time thing, and it all works out and whatnot. And the characters basically get out of the burning building and stuff.
Yeah, the one thing we do get though is that the characters, like most of the team, do not go to wherever the coordinates are. They're kind of stuck at the house, it seems like, at the moment. Like, they're taking care of the Russians, but they're not going anywhere. It's Hayley Atwell and the wife of Dunlow that hop on a sled dog team and start making their way out into the ice to go wherever they need to meet up with Tom Cruise.
Yeah. Actually, if you want something that could have just been cut here, there's a little sequence where, like, the wife decides she's going to go to sleep, so she tries to, and she can't speak English, so she's trying to explain to Hayley Atwell how to like command the dogs, and it's just a bit, basically a little comedy scene. And in hindsight, I'm looking at it going, yeah, you didn't really need this. You could have just like, you know, she's just there with her when Tom Cruise gets to the ice. That's fine.
Yeah, I understand that once we start Ethan down in the submarine sequence, we don't want to cut back. We want to just hold on him because it enforces this atmosphere of isolation and really makes it work as a sequence. However, I think surrounding that sequence, whether that be a little bit after, probably mostly before, I needed a bit more of what I would have hoped was the whole team, but I'll take Hayley on her own with this woman, of getting to the location, of them like just showing like anything at all, of showing them getting there. Instead, we get them this comedy sequence of them learning how to use the sled dogs and then driving off, and then nothing for 20 minutes until, whoops, she's there and she saved Tom Cruise, and that's it.
I don't know if I agree, just because I think it would be a mistake to ever cut away once Tom Cruise is going to enter the water.
Yeah. But I think there was, I don't know, I guess maybe what I wanted was like the team reuniting and going to the location, so it's not just Hayley Atwell there at the end,
sure.
Or even just showing like her calling into the rest of the team and saying like, hey, is everyone good? And they're like, hey, you're going to have to do this on your own. We don't have the ability to get out to you. And then that would come back. There was one of the visions that Tom Cruise saw in the AR thing was the ice blowing up with Hayley Atwell on it. And he specifically tells her, stay off the ice.
Oh, I forgot
don't
about
go
that.
on the ice.
Yeah,
and that doesn't get a payoff at all.
Yeah, I completely forgot about that. And she is on the ice to come and get him, which would feel like she's risking danger. But I'd forgotten about that warning by that point, so it didn't even enter my head.
Right. So maybe this thing where she's saying like, hey, I was told to stay off the ice. You want me to go alone? And they're like, you're the only one who can. At least that would do something to raise stakes. But it just ends up being nothing there.
So to go back over to Tom Cruise side of things, there's a whole like leap. There's a literal leap of faith where it's like, okay, he's been given like a chopper from the carrier to go out and get to the submarine, but the submarine can't actually come up to the surface because that would alert like all the enemy subs and stuff to its location. So it can only go so high, and we have to trust that the captain's going to do it. He'll only do it for 30 seconds. Like, it's very much like he might not like come up at all. He might not find you.
Yeah. It's a one-way communication, so they have no way of knowing whether or not he's actually coming up to surface.
Yeah, and because like the waters are kind of risky, there's a lot of like Russian like boats or whatever around, and Tom Cruise realizes that he's putting these people in danger, and it's like, you know what? You guys need to leave and go back. You don't have enough fuel to stay out here. So he just jumps out of the plane. He's like, nah, I'm just going to jump. And he just jumps in the water. Yeah. And luckily for him, there's a deep sea team from the sub that comes up and gets him and takes him down. So this starts...
They taser him, which I don't feel like is the easiest way to transport someone down beneath, is unconscious like that, but whatever.
That's a fair point. I also feel like a taser in water is asking for trouble.
Yeah, especially salt water. It conducts electricity a little bit better.
But they take him out of the sub, and this little diving team are a little standoffish with them, and the captain comes to, or they take him to the captain, and he explains what he's doing. And ultimately, this all builds up to this idea that this captain, who is Milchick from Severance, for anyone who is wondering when he's popping up, but it all builds up to this idea that he is just sort of listening. He's not really giving away how he feels about anything that Tom Cruise is saying. But ultimately, when he's told that this is like taking the risk to save the day, he's like, come to the right man. He's like, yeah, this sounds great. I'll help you in your mission. This is giving me a captain hard on here. Let's go do it. Let's do the impossible.
Yeah. I think it's specifically when he phrases it as just like, yeah, we have to do this before the Russians. And he's like, before the Russians, you say? Well, absolutely. That's my entire job. I love fighting against the Russians. Let's go ahead.
So it's like, okay, so we're going to listen for the coordinates. The big thing that happens, other than just him being explained, we've got this diving, apparatus, this suit and tank, and it'll help with the decompression, and the diving team's explaining it to him. You have to also prep your body for it, so he's breathing something in on a treadmill and all that.
They were like 3 sentences away from just saying, this is liquid oxygen.
Yes.
And we're going to flood your suit with it. Your lungs are going to be breathing this instead.
No, they're a bit more vague. They just say it's a concoction with oxygen and other things to prep your body for the depths. But out of nowhere, to add some like tension during this side. So when they're fighting in the other side of the plot with the Russians, Tom Cruise has got a fight as well. He's in his underwear on the treadmill, and one of the officers on this submarine attacks him. And this is the only time, really, the cult that worships the entity comes into play is this guy. Because they do mention early on that, this cult of fanatics have been starting to infiltrate every level of, like, police and government. And if anything, I thought, you know what, 2 months isn't enough time for that to have happened to this degree where someone's on a sub. But whatever.
Yeah,
I'll roll with that.
that's where I kind of feel like if they had adapted over the syndicate aspect of it, because the syndicate clearly would have been that ingrained. But take what you got. There is one more thing that comes up later that I think is supposed to be a cult member, but we'll get to it.
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah, no, I know what you're talking about, actually, now you brought it up, yeah. So, he has a fight, and it's just an alright fight. He's in his underwear, he's kicking, he's like, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? And then ultimately, it's the lady from the dive team who ends up, like, sort of hitting them over the head and, like, saves the day. So...
Yeah. I get why she would have done it from like a plot perspective, and it builds this like rapport of like they were all kind of standoffish to him, but then she just proved that she's willing to be on his side. But she doesn't know what happened. She doesn't know why they're fighting. Why did she go against her obvious teammate here instead of Tom? The situation could have just as easily been this random guy who got on our sub started stabbing people.
Yeah, I think it's just the situation she finds them in is that the bad guy's on top trying to stab him, so at the very least you would de-escalate that first and then maybe find out. But admittedly, I do agree that she seems to just assume right immediately that Tom Cruise was the innocent victim here, and it, so... But we're moving on. We don't have time to waste exploring this. It's time to suit him up and put him into the chamber that'll let him out into the water. Yeah, this is like the sequence. So this is the first big sequence of the movie that feels kind of special. Is him going out into the water. Not only that, like even before we get to anything else, we've established by this point that one of the Russian subs is following this sub. So when he goes out of the side of the sub, he sees the Russian sub coming at him. It's actually very close, and he ends up having to try and dodge the propeller of this sub, but he's almost mincemeat just from that.
I am actually very impressed with how they set this up, because there is a running theme in this movie of dodging the propellers, or dodging the back fin specifically, that gets paid off in the very end of the third act. So clever boy there.
In a comedic way, might I add.
Yes.
Like, they realize Gabriel was kind of shit, so we're just going to have fun with his death.
Yes, absolutely.
So he avoids the sub, and it's like he has to go down further to find the sunken, Sevastopol sub. So, yeah, I was totally getting the Abyss kind of vibes of this, but interestingly, there's no radio contact, he's not talking to anyone else, it never cuts to anything else, it's atmospheric through the wazoo, right? It's everything with him descending, trying to find a hatch to get inside, and then exploring the sub, and there being parts of the sub that aren't filled with water because of how it's landed, but then as like doors are opened and certain parts start to fill with water, it starts to make the sub kind of start to roll off the edge of the ravine, or I don't even know if you call it that underwater, but you know what I mean. Yeah. It starts to like roll off the thing that's like teetering on, and all of it's great. And one of my favorite things about it, other than just the eeriness of him going around and seeing a couple of dead bodies that are still sitting there in their positions and whatnot, is when the sub starts to roll, it basically became like an underwater version of the hallway from Inception, where you could tell the angle of things because of where the water level was moving, and it was really cool. Like, it felt really like expensive.
Yeah. They specifically show some shots where we're following the water level, like we're always level with that, and things just start turning. But then there's also shots where it'll bolt it to the ground, and you just see the water start going up onto the walls and then onto the ceiling. And yeah, it feels like whatever set they built for this, it took up the entirety of the warehouse they were filming.
Yeah, and it's super atmospheric, like I say. It's very eerie. I love the atmosphere. I love that there's like not a word spoken until there's one line spoken, and it did make that one line feel really clunky, especially since it's just there to explain something to the audience, so it really sticks out like a sore thumb, because it's been so silent up until that point. But when he does get to the computer chamber thing, and he puts in the key, he gets the thing out, what did they keep calling it? I can't remember what they called the actual little drive thing. They called it something.
Oh god, it's like the pod is what I essentially got out of it, but it had like a long Russian name to it.
So he gets that, he puts in his little baggie, whatever. But by this point, the sub's starting to roll down this thing, and it's filling up with water. He can't get out of the door he came in because now the torpedoes are blocking it. And there's a moment where he's like trying to figure out how does he get out of here, and it feels almost hopeless. And he looks over, but he sees the torpedo doors, and he says to himself, "The torpedo hatches," and it just felt like they maybe tried some different ways to visually represent to the audience what he was going to try and do here, but ultimately they just need to have him say the line, because otherwise too much of the audience wouldn't have got it.
If I were to change it without him saying a word, because we've already done flashbacks and stuff like that, even within this sequence specifically, I think the best thing they could have done is show the clip of them firing the torpedo and then make a new visual or something like that, that as the torpedo goes past the camera, we hold on the empty bay and show that it's empty now. I think that is the best way you could have visually shown it without any sort of audio to it.
No, I mean, I would say that the easier thing is just to literally, like, if you're going to do a little flashback, I would show them loading it into the pod or the door, right? You know, actually just show them shoving it in. But honestly, I don't even think you need that, because I think I was thinking about it, because the line stuck out to me, so I was actively thinking about it in the moment of, oh, I get why they did that, but it feels weird because it's been so quiet and it's kind of ruined the silence a little bit. But I think you do visually have a way of doing it, because the movie kind of does it. He goes to a torpedo, like, a launching thing. He opens the door, but he can't use it because there's a torpedo inside it. And I think that visual is all you need, because you realize that he's going to the second one. So it would have meant a few seconds of not knowing what he's trying to do, but as soon as you see that torpedo in that, you'd be like, oh, that's what he's going through, a torpedo thing. There you go.
I do wonder if obviously we would have gotten it, but I do wonder if the general audience would have known that that was the back end of a torpedo without being told it beforehand.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. But that's it. It's a minor quibble, because the scene's fantastic in every other sense. It's just that one little line just feels like tacked on to explain it to the audience. But he does get out. We get that great shot of the subs, sinking down as he's swimming upwards. And also, actually, so before he gets into the pod, he can't fit. His big backpack from his suit that's going to keep him alive is too clunky. And I thought, oh god, are they really going to try and convince me that he's going to survive going up without that? But instead, he just rips off all of the suit and keeps the tank so he can put the tank in front of him. And so it almost reminded me of Bishop and Aliens going through the pipe when he's like traveling to go to the signal tower thing. But he gets out. However, when he's with the subs going down past them, his strap from the thing gets caught in one of the fins, and he's going to get dragged down, so he has to abandon that as well. So he's straight up in his underwear, and the only thing he's really got is the little baggie that he's got with the important things in it, right? So he's swimming up as best he can, and it was explained earlier that his muscles are going to go all weird because of the bends and whatever. And he's getting up to the surface, but he starts to basically die and freeze, and it's like, oh no, and I'm like, obviously he's going to be fine because it's a movie, but I'm like, you are pushing the limitations of me believing him surviving something to the absolute brink with this movie.
Yeah, like if they had spent if they actually managed to say, okay, we hit the time perfectly, and he's banging on the ice, he's curled up or whatever, and we see the chainsaw cutting the hole at that point, and he just comes up and he goes, I'm okay, I'm all right. That would have been too much. But the fact that underneath the ice, he does essentially die. He is out of breath, he doesn't make it, and it seemingly is several hours, potentially, before anyone actually ends up getting him out of the ice. I'm more okay with that, because they implied... We don't know that. We don't know it's several hours. I think you're reaching there. No. I feel like it must have been. I don't know. The movie just shows some time passes. Whether it's a minute, whether it's an hour, however long it is, some time passes. I am okay with that. I think that makes it a little bit more understandable of, this didn't line up perfectly, but we already said his body would have been fine on ice for some period of time. Yeah.
So he wakes up during CPR. Hayley Atwell's got him, and they're inside the little makeshift portable decompression chamber. And I will say, I don't think I love how intimate they made this scene, where it's they're snuggling in bed. And I get that he would be cold and she's using her body heat to try and help him recuperate. That fine, whatever. But they really do make it feel like it's an intimate after sex thing. And I just don't know if I ever need Ethan to have anything remotely like a love interest ever again. Like, I get it, she's an attractive woman, whatever, but like it felt a little like I just don't think the previous movie really set up that there's a romance here.
Again, this is if Ilsa were to have survived.
Yes.
If she were have to made it here, this would have been her, and I think it would have worked a little bit better. But because it's this thief that we just met in the last movie, yeah, it doesn't feel like that should be where we're at right now.
Yeah. That said, though, I did like the little joke at the end where the wife character's looking in through the little window at the top and just gives a little wave, and like Tom Cruise just awkwardly waves back. So, a little chuckle out of that. But yeah, and then obviously the team came in with the plane, and we get to sort of setting up what Act 3 is going to be.
Yeah.
So I mean, as far as setting that up, this is where it gets maybe a little messy with how many different parties there are involved, and everything that's going on here, because obviously Ethan and co want to take out the entity. Gabriel, who we've not seen in so long at this point, also wants to take control of the entity, so he wants the source code that Ethan just got, and he's got the poison pill. He wants to use some of this stuff, so that's happening. Somewhere along here, as the president's making decisions, Kittredge takes Shea Wiggum's character Briggs, and they're going off to go and try and like get involved in everything that's going on. So they're
basically like, oh, we have no idea where the Sevastopol is, but we do know that he will eventually end up at this South African place. So we're headed there.
So Ethan and co, after he has his little one-on-one with Donley, Donley? Yeah, Dunlow. There you go. He explains what the plan is going to be, and it turns out Luther made one of those crystals from the Fortress of Solitude, because they pull out this crystal, and you can see like circuitry inside it up close. You can see some actual electrical things in there, but it's a data crystal, and they explain it's about 370 terabytes in the palm of your hand, and I'm like, oof, that's a lot of porn. So
yeah.
Like
that was my thought when they were explaining the Doomsday Bunker, and they say like, oh, there's all these servers loaded up, but it has like 15 exabytes of space, and I'm like, wow, that's the entirety of Wikipedia, and then 99% of the porn on Earth.
All of this stuff deemed worth of preserving. So yes, most of the porn.
Yep.
So it's like, okay, the whole plan here is to make the entity think it's one, and that by using the poison pill or the nukes going off and all that, we have this little very quick window where when it transfers into the bunker, because it wants to survive the apocalypse, right? It's not going to launch the nukes without surviving.
Right.
So it wants to go in there to survive. There's going to be a little 100 millisecond window where it'll transfer into this crystal, but before it can launch the nukes. And in that 100 milliseconds, before it can do that, if we remove it, it'll be trapped in this crystal and won't be in like the greater system anymore. And this is where Hayley Atwell's skills come into play, because basically they're saying how crazy this is, what the chances of like, because they show they do that thing where they're showing it play out, like they've done in previous movies, and Benji's the one taking it out, and it's like, hey, if he does it too soon, the entity's not in there, nothing happens. If it lights up, but it takes them even just a second to do it, then, well, the nukes have been launched. You've got the entity trapped, but the nukes have been launched, so that's hardly a win either. Right. And it's like, hey, Grace, you're the one that's going to do this. And she's like, wait, what? What? Me? I'm the one that's going to be responsible for like stopping all the nukes?
Yeah. And just to be clear here, the initial plan is that they also have to time this. Well, the thing that they're timing in sync with is they're going to give the drive to Gabriel, and he's going to attach the poison pill to it in order to like control it. And that's the part where I'm losing the plot. Like, between the two parties of the entity and IMF, I get it. I understand that like we're trapping it inside this, all that makes sense. But Gabriel's whole plot up until this point is he wants to control the entity. But every single thing that we have established up to this point is that poison pill, the moment it's uploaded, will destroy all traces of the entity almost instantly. So what does he gain here? Why would he do this?
Well, that's a good point to make, because as soon as Tom Cruise tries to enact this plan, Gabriel immediately says, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to blow this place up so that there's no safe place to go and therefore no nukes will launch. And to be honest, I hate to admit it, but Gabriel might have a good idea here. Like, if there's no place for the entity to hide, it probably won't, trigger Armageddon, at least until there's a new backup plan in place. So it's not a terrible plan on his part.
Yeah, no, with his plan in place, like Gabriel's plan independently of I'm going to destroy this place and then I'm going to control it because I'll have the poison pill and I can just say, oh, I'll upload this if you don't do whatever I say. That makes sense. But then why did Ethan ever think? Like, I'm trying to remember what Ethan's justification was of saying he'll get out and he'll immediately upload the poison pill. Like, that's what will happen. That part, they said it once, I didn't catch it, or it didn't make sense in the moment, and I just cannot wrap my head around what it could possibly have been.
Yeah, it's flying through those explanations so quick, but you just kind of have to roll with it. You have to roll with it and just get to the action and all that. So the team's assembled, they're going to go in and do this thing, they're working together. Paris kind of promises not to kill Gabriel until... which I do like the payoff to this though. Once the gunfight all starts, and once we've also got like Shea Wiggum and Kittredge there, and we've got like 3 parties all involved in this kind of standoff. I do like the moment where Tom Cruise just yells out, "Hey Paris, kill him now! Green light, go!" And she's just like immediately jumping into it. Unfortunately, her gun's out of ammo, so she doesn't actually get to kill him. But like she's like, "Okay, fine, the go ahead. It's time, baby. I'm going to kill Gabriel."
My life's mission completed.
Yeah, so there's a whole thing where the team shows up, but Gabriel's already there waiting for them. But then when they're in charge, then Kittredge and the CIA pop up out of the shadows, and then they're in charge for a little bit. But of course, there's now there's a big nuke. Gabriel's brought a big nuke with him. It's even bigger than the one from before. It's 30 megatons or some shit, and it works like the same before. Like, you can maybe disarm the nuke part of it, but there's still going to be a blast. So most of the team are left here. Some of them are going to be obviously doing the tech side of things, where they're trying to do the entity plot, whereas Donnelly and his wife and Degas end up being the ones who are going to try and take care of the nuke. So we've got these two things going on, whilst Tom Cruise is chasing Gabriel to get the poison pill, because for the whole plan to work, right, the whole idea is that once the poison pill goes into the drive with the source code, the entity will retreat to this safe bunker to get away from it, right? And like disconnect and be off grid. And that's the split second where, in theory, Hayley Atwell can make the little, pull the thing out and be like, done, right? We've stopped it. We've got it trapped in the crystal. That's the plan. And obviously there's a bunch of complications. Like, Benji got shot, so he's like half dying, and we've got Paris trying to perform.
And he's the only one who knows all the tech stuff, so he's trying to relay it over to Hayley Atwell as she's doing it. Yeah,
Paris is trying to like save his life, and there was a good laugh here actually when he's like, "Hey, you get any medical experience?" And she's like, "I kill people." He's like, "I can work with that. Cut into me."
Yeah, play it by ear. The other, this. All right, so we did a live stream somewhat recently, and I was called out on whether or not I still hate Benji. And my thing that I have said from the beginning is I don't hate Benji. I hate how the movies use Benji as a character whose incompetence makes things harder for the rest of the team. That's what I hate at how they use Benji. I think this movie uses him perfectly, because it's nothing he does that causes any problems here. But they still manage to use him as a comedic entity with, as he's like dipping in and out of consciousness, right on the verge of saying these very important parts of the plan of like what wires to cut and whatnot. That's the way you do the comedic relief character without boiling him down to making everyone else's lives worse because of his choices. So just want to say Benji was played well in this movie. Kudos to that.
Yeah, and they have a couple of laughs here where he's kind of like passing out before he's like, "Whatever you do, don't cut the," and then like he's like, "Benji, wake up!" And he's like, "Red, don't cut the red." They do a little bit of comedy with it, but it's played fairly straight otherwise. And then you've got the other characters, the C team, I guess we'll call them, of the couple plus Degas working on the nuke. And they're like, "Oh, we're basically going to sacrifice ourselves. Oh, maybe if we cut all these wires, we'll have 10 seconds to run to the server room," which is, maybe safe, so that becomes their plan.
Mm-hmm.
But this is all playing out, of course, as Tom Cruise is chasing down Gabriel, and it leads to the big set piece of the third act, which is the planes, which feels like a sort of evolution of the helicopter stuff in Fallout, but with two biplanes instead. In the sense that, you know, and to be fair, Gabriel did set up that they had two planes because he said he brought a spare just in case. So the second plane goes by, and it's revealed that Tom Cruise has grabbed onto the bottom of the biplane, and we get a lot of him climbing up, punching the guy. But the fun stuff here, I think, really comes from him trying to, like, reach in and try and fly the stick a little bit whilst he's dangling on the outside of the plane. So there's a lot of, like, nose diving and him, like, you know, and when he eventually, like, transitions to the plane that Gabriel's on, and I think that transition moment's very good, actually, where he's sort of, like, hovering, like, on top of one and, like, tries to jump up to the other. I think that's a really thrilling set piece. I think the part that looked the most impressive to me is when Gabriel knows he's there and he starts doing, like, loops and stuff. He flies upside down, and it's almost like the gravity's, like, not even changing. It's almost like zero G for a second as he's, like, turning, and, like, Tom Cruise is trying to keep, like, afloat somehow and, like, that, you know, hold on to the wings and whatnot.
It's doing the same as the Inception bit. Like, we were talking the Inception bit kind of underwater. They're doing that same thing there where the camera is pinned in place, or it might be turning with it, but you get this sense of disorientation as we're zooming about in these different aerial acrobatics.
Yeah, I did. You know what? If I could say something slightly positive about Gabriel, there's a point in this part where he just starts laughing like a maniac, and I'm like, you know what? Yeah, just give me the psychotic villain. Yeah, just you know, he's just crazy. Just give me that.
Yeah,
whatever.
At least that's something.
Yeah, but eventually Cruise is able to punch him and try and take over, and they're both, like, dangling at the plane at this point, and he's like, "Hey, Ethan, only one of us has a parachute. Good luck." And then he lets go to, like, basically let himself drop so he can go and use his parachute. And he hits his head immediately on the fin of the plane, and it's like an instant, like, death. And it got a good laugh in the theater. Everyone kind of chuckled at it. So, you know, he went out like a chump.
Yeah. I mean, I appreciate it because, again, it's kind of the rule of threes where we had the stuff with you got to dodge the Russian sub as you come out the back, dodge that back propeller. And then as the sub is sinking down to the ocean floor, he has to dodge that back propeller again. He ends up getting caught on it. So this is kind of just the payoff to that, where it's, all right, he's jumping off the plane, but he doesn't think about the back wing. He doesn't think about the back propeller, and he smacks his head into it and just immediately dies. Yeah.
And then Tom Cruise has to try and use the... he's grabbed the poison pellet during all this, and he's trying to, like, insert it into the thing as the plane's going down. He realizes that he has to kind of get out the plane because it's on fire. So he parachutes, does it mid-air, or he tries to do it mid-air, realizes the parachute's on fire from the plane, right? So that the parachute disappears. He tries to launch the second parachute, but he goes under all the mist, so we can't actually see if he succeeds. And we cut back to the others, and we're just kind of waiting for the thing to light up. And I will say this, I really appreciated that when the drive, the crystal lights up and Hayley Atwell grabs it, I do appreciate that they timed it so quick that it does feel like that might have legitimately been 100 milliseconds. Like, it feels,
right,
you know, like, because they showed us Benji try to do it earlier, like, in the sort of flash ahead to what the plan is, and he fails. And it felt quite quick when he did it, but obviously it's a second, so it's too long. But this felt like a blink snap. Like, it felt, you know, it was like, okay, her pickpocket skills, the timing, as they kept pointing out, came into play. Very good.
Yeah. I mean, it's worth noting that it's this timing between, like, it uploading, cutting a red wire, and picking all at once. So it's a lot going on. And then, of course, the nuke is also just happens to be at, like, 10 seconds as all of this is happening as well. Yeah. So it's all high tension.
I mean, we have to talk about the nuke side of things as well, because, you know, we do keep cutting back to the president and, like, them try to convince her, hey, we should launch nukes at all of the cities that have the nukes so that we don't get nuked. Because we're going to be the last country with a nuclear arsenal. We should preemptively strike, to the point where they're like, hey, and I like that they point this out. One of them says, hey, the political landscape, if we launch nukes against all these cities, even though it's as justifiable as it possibly could be, arguably, Like, the political landscape is going to be a disaster after this because everyone's going to hate this country for obvious reasons. And like they said, they sort of say to her, "Hey, maybe we should offer up a gesture." And I thought what they were suggesting there is that, like, warn them, like, give them like, hey, you've got, we've got 7 hours. Try and evacuate as many people from these places as you can because we have to stop all your nukes from launching. And I'm like, okay, that'd be something. But no, what they're suggesting is that we nuke one of our own cities to say, hey, we lost one too. I'm sorry, would that make any other country feel better? I don't think it would, but...
No, definitely not. I get it from the viewpoint of the way the movie is playing it out, but it's kind of this thing where they are saying how high tensions are between countries and that nothing can be trusted or anything like that. But somehow they're still receiving news of when people lose access to their nuclear arsenals. And I feel like there needed to be this middle ground where we show that they can still communicate with each other in some way. And if that's feasible, then they absolutely should have the ability to evacuate. They should absolutely be like, hey, we're planning on nuking Paris. Get everybody out, as many as you can.
Yeah, it felt like they're all determined to convince her of this. I will say, so I like some of these actors that are in this like little team that are talking to her. I will say that Nick Offerman, I don't think he belongs in this type of role. I love him as Ron Swanson, and I think he's been good in some other stuff. I think him as the clean-shaven military man just didn't quite work for me. He felt a little bit miscast.
Yes, but he does do a sacrifice play by the end, and I feel like he worked in that moment. I feel like the heart of gold underneath kind of guy works a little bit for what Nick Offerman is. Just to get to the end of that sequence, as we come down to the final moments and she's about to press the big red button, blow up all these cities, she comes to the conclusion of, actually, no.
Hold on. She makes a choice. The choice. She chooses not to pick death.
There's always a choice. Yes.
That said,
puts down the thing.
This movie has its own versions of that line. The two that kept coming up was, we live in the entity's reality, right? That comes up like 10 times in this movie. And then the other one that kept coming up was, the one about for those who we will never meet. That came up about 10 times as well.
Yeah, apparently that's the oath of the IMF. I think that was what the little catchphrase they said at the beginning of 7 was to his DoorDash driver. But yeah, it's those just things are recurring motifs of like, yeah, we do this not because it's people we love, but because of people we'll never meet. But no, the end of that sequence is she makes the choice to not bomb them and instead take the nuclear arsenal offline, like as they should have done forever ago. The moment this thing started being technologic, they should have taken this stuff offline. But they make the point of saying, but ma'am, that will leave us open to attacks. And she points out, well, no, because it's not going to launch the attack if it doesn't have full control of the system. If we are still on the board, then it's still at risk to be destroyed. So that's her see-through. However, that's where we get one of the doomsday cult people who ends up trying to take a shot at her when she's trying to make this call.
Working in the Secret Service, and the other Secret Service lady kind of like stops the shot from happening, and it's eventually Nick Offerman who takes him out but gets shot in the process and has his old tragic death. And sadly, as noble as her intentions were, right after this, they lose control of their nukes anyway because she didn't finish giving the order to shut them down. And that just ramps up tension for everything else that's happening. But of course, when the moment happens where the crystal lights up, they get it. And of course, they reveal that Tom Cruise did survive. The backup parachute did open. He is there. He's okay. It cuts back to Holt McQuarrie, and he's like, "That son of a bitch. He did it." So we get, and it cuts around. We see like the reaction of, the captain of the ship, the captain of the submarine, all sort of having their little moments where they smile, like, "By God, he did it." Ethan Hunt, the miracle man, he did it.
Yeah, it's also worth noting that this is the reason they know he did it is because the world's power grid like goes down. Everything is gone, and that's why I thought for a moment like, oh, they were never going to fix that problem with the idea of the world's entire infrastructure will implode because of this choice. Like, that's something that still happens, but then it just comes back up again.
It just
Like,
reboots.
I guess they just needed to reboot the planet for a second.
So yeah, and there's a lot of like just music playing as we see reactions and moments of things, and even Benji's fate's a little bit up in the air at this point. But the whole thing that happens here is that Kittredge like shows up with Briggs, and it's mostly quiet, and like Ethan hands over the poison pill and the drive, but of course Kittredge looks at it and it's all burned out because it's been used, and he's like, "You son of a bitch, Ethan. I was going to use this to control the entity, and now it's gone. You've ruined my plans again, you son of a bitch."
Well, there's a very long monologue that's all written out by Ving Rhames, who apparently, as they put in the poison pill, it just triggers an audio file of like, "Hey, Ethan, I'm dead now, but let's talk about our journey to get here."
He basically says, "Hey, you're important, and you know." Actually, it's funny, the comparisons to Skynet, because in other words, he basically says a couple of times in this movie, because the other big phrase from the last movie, which annoyingly pops up again in this one, is the phrase, "It is written," comes up a few times, and he says "it is not written," which is very similar, actually, to "there is no fate but what we make," which is a Terminator thing.
You know what I'm realizing?
Yes.
Very quickly here. We have the Skynet. We have the bit where he's trying to get into the torpedo chamber. You were comparing that to Aliens. And we have the Abyss. I think this is just the James Cameron movie.
Well, no, it's a love letter to James Cameron movies.
Yeah.
I think a James Cameron movie would be better, to put a fine point on it.
Also, much longer.
That's not true. Avatar 2 was about this
You don't
length.
think he would break the 3-hour mark? I thought it was over the 3-hour mark.
Maybe it was.
Am I wrong on that?
I mean, the first one wasn't, though. To be fair, Avatar 2 is the only movie he's made that I think is over 3 hours. Because maybe Titanic was, actually, now I'm thinking about it. But regardless, anyway.
You're right.
Yeah, and obviously this is where we finally get the, like, Ving Rhames ends the message with, "This message will self-destruct in 5 seconds," which just feels like a sweet callback at that point. But they do a thing where Briggs comes over Ethan, and you think, oh, is Kittredge just going to order to have him killed because he's mad at him or whatever? And Briggs holds out a gun, but then he uses his other hand to take it away, leaving just the open hand to shake Ethan's hand. Because, again, that son of a bitch, he did it.
There's been several points in this movie, I can't remember exactly where, but at least 3 times they used the word reckoning.
Yes.
Like,
yes.
Calling in, they're just like, "Yes, the final reckoning." And one of the times is Shea Wiggum saying to Tom Cruise, like, "We will have our reckoning." And you think that's what's going to happen here. Like you said, he pulled out the gun. But, yeah, of course, he's cool with them. He saved the day. Sometimes, turns out it's okay to go rogue. Especially 7 times over the course of 8 movies.
To be fair, it was 6 times, because he's still rogue in this one from the last one. He's not went rogue again.
All right, fine. 6 out of 7 times. But regardless, he only stayed straight once.
And it was by far the worst movie, so I don't know what to say. So, yeah, the movie's ending is kind of, they do this thing where they're in London, and like Tom Cruise is walking around being all happy that everyone's like, it's like, oh, all these people had no idea they were about to die, and like, oh, taking in the moment, the busy metropolis, all that stuff. And he meets up with Hayley Atwell. There's not a word spoken. All of this is just music playing over everything. He meets up with her. She hands him the crystal with the entity on it, and she walks off. And as he looks around, he sees Benji walk out from like a corner. He sees Pom walk out from a corner, and Degas walk out from a corner. This is the moment, by the way, that if Jeremy Renner just was standing there as well and like give him a nod, I'd have been like, yes, acknowledge him.
Well, I was. There's a tiny little sequence right before this where Angela Bassett gets off a plane, and they've been hinting throughout this movie that her son is in the military, and so she was worried about her son, and they finally get a reunion there. I was thinking that it was going to be somewhere around that period, somewhere where we see, everyone leaving the bunker, and then Jeremy Renner's like, a more tasteful version of what did I miss?
Yeah, I mean, as much as if they did bring Renner back, I would want him to be in the mix of things like 4. Given how they used him in 5, though, if he like showed up in the bunker with the president and he was the one kind of arguing on behalf of Ethan, that might have worked as well, if that's how they wanted to use him.
I would have been cool with him being the agent that stopped the one from shooting her. Like he
Sure.
shows up there and just like the last second save because he's like, yeah, I'm here.
Yeah. I mean, this little final scene's all right. It kind of ends like 4 actually, with Ethan walking into the crowd and it being like, oh, he's disappeared into the thing. So, that's kind of what they go for here. Apparently, this was how they like McQuarrie has been wanting to end one of these movies with this scene for like since he started making them. Basically, he always had this idea of this silent, just looking at all the team members and like the sense of victory kind of thing. But this is the thing, at the end of the movie, Ethan's still alive. Most of the team are still. It's only Luther that's gone. Like this absolute, and even the message that Luther leaves him is like, oh, this, he basically says, you'll always be there, kind of thing. And it felt like, yeah, if they want to do another one, as much as this has had so many references to the first movie, it feels like it's come full circle. It also doesn't feel like this was a definitive end where it has to be the last one either. So.
Yeah, it feels like this has to be Tom Cruise's last as the lead, but they could continue the franchise following, again, anyone else on the team here. If they wanted to try to institute someone new and just keep the side cast the same, maybe that could work as well. But Tom Cruise couldn't return as the lead of the movie.
Which I guess begs the question, who is the lead? I don't think you make anyone who's here the lead. I think you keep the team as the supporting cast, and you have someone else new, or hell, maybe you just go with the old idea of bringing Renner in, like have him come back and be the new hero. But
I demand that DoorDash guy from the beginning of 7. He is the lead now.
Who's like like one of the hot young actors right now who's like coming up, who's like in his 20s? Who's available?
I wouldn't say coming up. He's already at the peak, but Chalamet would be the first one that jumps to mind. I don't think he's fit for the role, but
I think he's miscast.
He's in that.
Maybe, what about, what's his name? Paul Mescal from Gladiator 2. He could probably be that type of guy for this.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah.
I think he'd have to be a different type, because that's the thing, is that the Ethan Hunt character, if you're trying to fit into that same mold, especially when you see Jeremy Renner, and like it's the same kind of thing, is that there has to be this effortlessly cool. Like, it's not something where he's tough. It doesn't matter if the guy is tough. He has to be cool.
Yeah, and what you do is so it's like a sort of semi-reboot where the rest of the team are the one that recruit him, kind of thing, and like have his like origin, how he gets into IMF be the plot of his first movie. You could do that.
Yeah.
Or her, by all means, like, but I don't think they would, but give us who's an upcoming actress that you could buy in this role.
That's kind of what I thought they were getting at with the Hayley Atwell character. Because she is technically an IMF agent now. They don't play with that at all. They just do anything with it. But I thought that's kind of the vagary they were going with, is that she would be the one who could theoretically take the place of Ethan now that she's part of the IMF.
Yeah, I don't know. That's to say, like, are they actually going to do any of this? I don't know. I don't know. It depends, I guess, how successful this movie is, if they're going to feel desperate. But even if they don't, it's exactly the sort of thing, though, where after, like, 10 years, they're going to be like, hey, it's time to retry Mission Impossible in some form. And then whether it has any continuity with these movies, or they just do a complete fresh reboot, but they will do more. They will try again down the line, because they'll do it with like, it's insane how quick some of these franchises, like, fail and then immediately come back within 5 years now for another go-round.
Oh. I have no Jurassic Park idea what you're talking about.
Very good, very good. Look forward to that review over in the Atomic Cinema Experiment, our sci-fi movie podcast, in about a month's time. Yeah, that actually, it was so funny is that I realized that's like a week before Superman, and I'm actually looking forward to that movie. And I just know that I'm going to go to see Jurassic Park Rebirth, or World Rebirth, and be like, the movie I want to see is next week. I'm just kind of doing this one because I have to.
Filling time.
It is what it is. Yeah, I mean, obviously we've made fun of stuff. There is stuff to make fun of. There is some legitimate critiques to be made as far as editing, pacing, some plot stuff not quite adding up. But I've been on the record multiple times that Mission Impossible is about the set pieces, and the plot is usually the weakest thing. And at least here, there's like some elements of the plot that I think are fun ideas, even if they're not completely used to their fullest, and there's definitely some things I was hoping would pay off more, with certain, Shea Wiggum's character being the big one. So there's things to complain about, there's things to critique. I still had a good time though. I would still rank it above some of the other ones, which we'll get into in a bit, but
in terms of like you're talking about the stunts and stuff being the biggest thing, I think the atmosphere of the submarine scene has not been something that this franchise has reached before, so that's a kudos on that. When it comes to the biplane scene, I think it's very well done, obviously from the viewpoint of the stunts being done, the fact they are actually on a biplane, which is impressive in its own right. It's very well done, but I still think it's not quite on the level of the Burj Khalifa. I think that still stands as like the most impressive stunt that they've done.
I think it's a slight improvement, and when I say that, I mean they're both very, very excellent. To the helicopter stuff and Fallout, I think that and then this biplane stuff are both excellent. I kind of agree the Burj Khalifa is still my favorite like set piece of the franchise, at least from a stunt perspective. I think the submarine stuff in this is arguably maybe something I like more because of the atmosphere, but it's less because of the stunts and more about the kind of the setting and like just how absurdly expensive the whole thing is. I was just checking actually. So Mission Impossible opened to 63 million domestically for the weekend, which does seem a bit low. And I think that's maybe because Lilo and Stitch got 145 million, so they're kind of competing a bit there. So
I mean, it's different audiences, but there is a limited amount of money, and you're going to go take your kids to see something before you go on your own for something.
Yeah, I'm actually curious what the last one did. I'm going to find out quickly.
Well, remember, the last one got destroyed by COVID in like everything, so
no,
it might be a bit lower.
No, it didn't come in until 2023, so that had no effect on the actual box office. The schedule of making it.
What am I thinking of?
I don't know what you're thinking.
I'm thinking of the SAG AFTRA
the strike
that killed the promotional
Yeah, there was
stuff.
there was no interviews and stuff. But if I go to domestic,
I mean, I don't know about opening weekend, but in total it was 291 million.
The opening weekend
that was budget.
The opening weekend, that's very different. What?
Sorry. I just misread the line, sorry.
The opening weekend for the last one was 54 million, so it's up a little bit from that one, but it's still under that 100 million kind of tentpole success that the studio's usually looking for. So I suspect, this movie made the last movie just made just under 400 million worldwide, which was definitely seen as a bit of a disappointment compared to previous entries. I suspect this will do something similar, maybe a little higher, and then the franchise will go on a, cool down for a bit.
Yeah, it is worth noting that we are doing this on Memorial Day Monday, where people do have off work, so it is going to get still another bump here. It's not like it's done for the weekend entirely.
That is true. The Monday estimates are in actually, so the Monday is looking like 14 million added onto that. So
really, that's not as high as I thought it would be.
Yeah, whereas Lilo and Stitch got 37 estimated million today in the US. So
there it is. Got to bring the kids.
Yeah, the kids' movies doing numbers. So yeah, I mean, it is what it is. We'll see how it goes, but
yeah.
All right.
I wouldn't be shocked if I would say before 2030, we get an announcement of something happening. I would not be shocked if it took that long to get there, but I think that they do want to probably back off this just a little bit for at least 2 to 3 years before they start making those plans and getting things in motion.
Yeah, if they do any more. Yeah. All right, David, what is your score for Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning?
So, with 4 still being the best, I don't think that's up for debate. I'm gonna say that this one is pretty much there. Like, I'm basically bounced between an 8 and an 8.5. That's kind of where I'm at on this. I don't think that it's just good. I think that it does accomplish great status, but obviously I don't think that it moves into that 9 territory where, like, it's really going on all cylinders and feels like it wasn't doing anything wrong. I think the more that I talk to you about the intro, that first 40 minutes and how rushed it really got, the more it got under my skin. So I think I'm just going to go with a solid 8 instead of giving that extra half point. But it is still like second tier to me. It's right underneath 4, so I'll give it credit where it's due.
Yeah, I think I don't think I can give it an 8. I think that's just a little too in the great territory given the problems it has. But because I think I compare it to 6 in a lot of ways because I feel very similar in terms of like not liking the opening acts of either movies, but then they both have good set pieces and stuff afterwards. So I think I'm going to be in a kind of a similar boat to that one and give it a 7.5. Which is to say there's a lot of stuff in here I like. So arguably a couple of the scenes are some of the best scenes in the entire franchise. But the plot's messy enough and there's enough weird editing and execution and, blow it that I can't go into great territory. I think that's a bit too much. But I enjoy myself. I'm happy, like with a lot of it, and I had a good time at the theater.
Yeah.
So
I think between the two of us, we can agree it makes the cut. I don't think there's any question on that.
Yeah, makes the cut. Yeah, I had a good time. So, but yeah, nothing touched 4. Nothing touched 4. Nope. It's fair to say. So. But that's our thoughts on the Mission Impossible franchise. If you've been with us for 8 episodes running, all 16 hours of us talking about Mission Impossible, congratulations, you've made it to the end. Yep. We're done. Which means that there's a new season on the horizon, and that new season is coming in a couple of weeks. So there's always at least 1 week off. There's kind of 2 weeks off here. If you're on YouTube, we're not just taking like a week off from like stuff in general. There's actually going to be 2 episodes of our other show, the Atomic Cinema Experiment, next week. So we're doubling up on Ace because we've got a couple of extra things to do there, mainly because this episode of this show took that show's slot. So we'll get a couple of episodes of Ace next week. Collector's Cut returns on the 14th of June, right? So 2 weeks this weekend. 14th of June, we return with the start of Superman season, where we will be working through the 4 original Christopher Reeve movies. We're also going to do returns, and that will lead in nicely to the brand new film from James Gunn that's coming out in July. So we're building up to another new release with the next season. So Superman season kicks off on June 14th. Look forward to that. Like I say, for the audio feed, it's a bit weird because it's like 2 weeks without an episode, but it's because we're doing Ace episodes. So if you're on YouTube or you also listen to that show, you're getting extra stuff on that one for a week. So we're trying to keep the schedules between the 2 shows a bit more flexible when there's new releases coming out, and this is kind of an example of that, where one's kind of taking precedent for a little bit while the other one gets some time later on. So that's what's happening. Join us in a couple of weeks for that. And of course, this is where I start telling you all about Patreon and YouTube memberships. You can get bonus shows from me and David. We do Criterion Cut, where we review movies from the Criterion Collection. We do extra reels, where we do some of the worst movies of all time. In fact, they kind of loosely tie into Mission Impossible on extra reels. We did the 1998 film, The Avengers. Not a Marvel thing. The Sean Connery, Uma Thurman, Ralph Fiennes, terrible British spy movie. It's horrible. We did that. We talked about it. It was torture. If you want to hear us talk about that, that's one of the perks you can get for supporting us on Patreon or via YouTube membership. If you want to do just a one-time thing, super thanks is also an option on YouTube. Any support from any direction is greatly appreciated. There's a back catalogue of bonus content now, so go and have a look and see if you're interested. But it helps keep the shows coming, so thank you very much. But that is everything. That is the show. That has been the Collector's Cut. So thank you once again for joining us. You chose to accept 2 idiots talking about this franchise for a numerous amount of episodes, so we appreciate it. Keep watching movies, and if you can get it, it's always nice to have diplomatic immunity.